Imagine standing in one of the driest deserts on Earth and finding water flowing where no river should exist. Beneath the sand, ancient engineers carved miles of tunnels, creating invisible rivers that turned barren land into farms, gardens, and thriving cities. No pumps, no electricity, just gravity, stone, and extraordinary precision. This was an underground water empire hidden beneath the desert. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy the forgotten mysteries of the ancient world. Now, let's follow the water into the darkness. At first light, the desert looks completely empty. Heat has not yet risen from the ground, and the distant mountains are still blue against the horizon. But almost nothing moves across the plain. There is no river shining beneath the sun. No lake breaks the brown expanse. No thick forest marks a hidden spring. The land appears to offer one simple verdict: people should not be able to live here for long. Yet scattered across this apparently lifeless country are fields of wheat, orchards heavy with fruit, villages shaded by old trees, and gardens where water slips quietly through narrow channels. Somewhere, a farmer bends beside a flowing stream that should not exist. The nearest mountain may be many kilometers away. Rain can disappear for months. The surface is dry enough to crack, and still, the water comes. The strange thing is that its journey is almost entirely invisible. Beneath the farmer's feet, a narrow tunnel cuts through earth and stone. It runs gently downhill through darkness, following a gradient so slight that an untrained eye might barely recognize it. The tunnel has no pumps. There are no engines forcing water forward. Gravity does almost everything. Far away, closer to the mountains, groundwater enters the passage and begins a slow, controlled movement toward the settlement. Above the tunnel, vertical shafts puncture the desert at intervals, forming lines of dark circles that stretch toward the horizon. Seen from the ground, they can resemble old wells. Seen from above, they look like stitches drawn across the landscape. These are the traces of one of the ancient world's most remarkable water systems. They're often called qanats, though related underground channels have carried different names in different regions. Their basic principle is deceptively simple. Find groundwater at a higher elevation, reach it through a deep shaft, cut a tunnel with an extremely gentle downward slope, allow the water to move naturally toward lower, drier land. Protect most of that water from the fierce sun by keeping it underground until it reaches the place where people need it. Simple, however, is not the same as easy. Some of these tunnels extend for many kilometers. Some descend astonishingly deep near their source. Generations of workers have entered narrow shafts with basic tools, limited light, and a constant understanding that the earth above them could become a grave. They remove soil basket by basket. They judge direction beneath the ground. They maintain a slope precise enough to keep water moving, but not so steep that the flow destroys the tunnel. A mistake of elevation can leave a channel dry. A collapse can seal years of labor behind stone. And because much of the network is hidden, the greatest engineering achievement in the landscape can remain almost completely unseen. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. For centuries, travelers crossing the dry regions of Iran and neighboring lands encountered settlements that seemed strangely green compared with the plains around them. Gardens appeared where rainfall alone could never reliably sustain them. Villages survived at distances from permanent rivers that would normally make agriculture precarious. In some places, cities depended on water arriving from sources their inhabitants could not see from their rooftops. The water did not roar through monumental aqueducts raised on arches. It did not announce imperial wealth with carved stone and towering masonry. It approached quietly beneath the ground. That silence may be one reason the scale of the system is so easy to underestimate. Ancient empires are usually remembered through objects that resist disappearance: palace walls, tombs, fortresses, temples, great roads made broad enough for armies. The Qanat leaves a different kind of monument. Its most obvious surface remains maybe nothing more than piles of excavated earth and a line of shafts. A visitor unfamiliar with the landscape might pass beside them without realizing that a carefully designed artificial river is moving below. And these underground rivers are not merely technical curiosities. In the driest environments, water determines almost everything. It decides where people can build. It limits how much grain they can grow. It shapes the number of animals they can keep and the size of populations that can survive a failed season. Where water is unreliable, political power is unreliable. A king may command soldiers, collect tribute, and claim enormous territory. But authority becomes strangely fragile when wells fail and crops wither. The Qanat changes that calculation. It does not create water from nothing. That distinction matters. The evidence remains incomplete in many regions, and ancient communities clearly used numerous methods of water management long before underground channels became widespread. Wells, springs, seasonal streams, floodwater farming, and surface canals all had their place. But the Qanat allows people to access groundwater differently. Instead of lifting each container from a deep well, the tunnel lets gravity deliver a continuous flow. Instead of exposing a long canal to direct sunlight, it shields much of the route from evaporation. Instead of placing an entire settlement directly beside the water source, it can bring water toward land better suited for habitation and farming. In a desert, those differences can alter history. To understand the world that produces this technology, it helps to forget the modern image of a desert as a single endless sea of sand. Much of the Iranian plateau is more complicated. Mountain chains rise above broad basins. Winter snow and seasonal precipitation fall at higher elevations. Water seeps into fractured rock, gravel, and alluvial deposits. It can collect underground even while the plains below appear brutally dry. The landscape is not always empty of water. Often, the water is simply hidden. Ancient people living in these environments do not need modern geological vocabulary to notice patterns. They watch vegetation. They observe springs. They remember which wells recover after winter. They see where water appears near the base of slopes. They learn that a dry surface can conceal saturated layers beneath it. Knowledge accumulates slowly, perhaps through generations of failed pits, successful wells, collapsing channels, and practical memory passed between workers. Exactly when and where the first true Qanats emerge remains debated. Many scholars associate their early development strongly with ancient Iran, and the technology is often connected with the first millennium BCE, though proposed dates and pathways of origin vary. Underground water galleries can be difficult to date. Tunnels are repaired, widened, abandoned, reopened, and extended. A channel used in recent centuries may follow a much older line, while the tools or debris found inside can belong to a later phase of maintenance. No single explanation fully accounts for every similar underground system found across the Old World. What survives in the record suggests something more interesting than one brilliant inventor suddenly discovering the secret of desert water. The Qanat appears to belong to a deeper human pattern. Long observation turning into organized engineering. Someone notices groundwater. Someone learns how to reach it, someone recognizes that a horizontal tunnel can intersect the water-bearing layer. Then comes the harder realization that the tunnel can be extended toward dry land at exactly the right angle. Once that system works, the landscape changes. Water reaches a field that could not previously be planted. A household stays through the dry season instead of moving away. Trees take root, shade appears, more families gather, a village becomes permanent. Maintenance crews form because the tunnel must be cleaned. Rules develop because flowing water must be divided. Land near the channel becomes valuable. The water that cannot be seen begins to organize everything visible above it. Across the empty-looking plain, those lines of shafts are therefore more than holes in the ground. They are the breathing points of an underground machine built without machines. They mark human decisions made in darkness, sometimes centuries or millennia ago, and they lead backward toward the mountains, where ancient communities first had to solve the most important problem in the desert, not how to survive without water, but how to reach the water that the desert was hiding. The mountains hold the first clue. From the desert floor, they seem distant and almost decorative, a dark wall beyond the haze, but their role is far more practical. In winter, snow gathers on high ridges, rain falls where cooler air rises across stone. Some of that water rushes briefly through ravines, creating violent seasonal floods that disappear almost as quickly as they arrive. Much of it, however, takes a quieter route. It sinks into fractured rock, gravel, and deep layers of sediment, moving underground toward the broad dry basins below. By the time it reaches the plains, the surface may show almost nothing. The river has vanished, but the water has not. For people living along the edges of these basins, survival depends on learning that difference. A green patch of reeds can reveal moisture beneath the soil. A certain tree growing where others fail may suggest a high water table. Damp earth discovered at the bottom of a shallow excavation can become the beginning of a well. Springs appearing near the foot of a mountain show where underground water is forced naturally toward the surface. Herds and wild animals repeatedly gathering in the same place provide another clue. None of these signs offers certainty, and the evidence remains incomplete when archaeologists attempt to reconstruct exactly how ancient communities learned to interpret them. But practical knowledge rarely needs to begin as a written theory. It begins with repeated observation. People remember where water lasted during a dry year. They remember which wells deepened successfully and which produced only dust. They notice that some springs weaken in summer but return after winter snow. They see that gravelly ground near mountain slopes often behaves differently from the hard, salty soils farther into the basin. Over generations, the landscape becomes readable, not easy, and certainly not predictable in every detail, but readable enough to justify dangerous labour. The geology of many desert margins creates particularly useful conditions. Rivers and floods descending from mountains carry stones, gravel, sand, and finer sediment. Over long periods, these materials spread outward in broad fan-shaped deposits at the base of the slopes. Water can move through the spaces between larger particles, especially in layers of gravel and coarse sediment. Beneath or between them may lie less permeable layers that slow the water's descent. The result can be an underground reserve supplied by distant precipitation. Modern hydrologists describe aquifers, recharge zones, permeability, and groundwater gradients. Ancient builders use different language when their terminology survives at all, but they confront the same physical reality. Water moves beneath the ground according to conditions in the rock and soil. A person who understands those conditions through experience can sometimes predict where digging will succeed. Sometimes, failure must have been common. A shaft can be sunk through meters of hard earth and reveal nothing. A promising damp layer can hold too little water to support a settlement. A well can turn saline. A spring can shrink after several poor winters. The desert punishes optimistic mistakes with unusual efficiency. This is one reason the knowledge of experienced water finders and tunnel builders becomes so valuable. Their skill is not mystical, even if later traditions occasionally surround specialists with an air of mystery. It is accumulated environmental intelligence. They examine the slope of the land, they study the mountain front, they inspect existing wells, they consider soil, plants, and the location of old flood channels. In some regions, they may compare the depth of water in neighbouring excavations. The goal is to estimate not only whether groundwater exists, but whether it can be intercepted at a high enough elevation to flow toward useful land. That final requirement is crucial. A deep well provides water only where the well stands, and someone must lift the water upward. The deeper the source, the greater the effort required. Human strength, animal power, lifting devices, and later mechanical pumps can all solve that problem to varying degrees, but each method imposes limits. A qanat approaches the problem sideways. Instead of hauling water vertically to the surface at the source, builders locate the water underground and cut a gently descending passage toward a lower point where the tunnel can eventually meet the open air. The mountain, in effect, becomes the elevated reservoir. This idea transforms geography. A community no longer needs to place itself directly beside a spring. The water can be persuaded to travel, not forced by pressure or mechanical power, but guided through an artificial route that follows gravity. Before such a tunnel can exist, however, someone must first find the water-bearing layer. This often begins with the deepest and most important excavation in the system, sometimes described as the mother well. The name carries an appropriate sense of origin. Every drop that later reaches fields and houses depends on the success of this first connection. Workers sink the shaft near a likely source zone, often closer to the mountain where groundwater lies beneath accumulated sediments. The depth can vary enormously depending on local conditions. In some places, groundwater is relatively close to the surface. Elsewhere, builders descend dozens of meters, and certain systems reach far deeper. The deeper the shaft, the greater the danger, and the more difficult the removal of excavated material becomes. Imagine the first days of such work. The desert surface is bright and open. A circle is marked in the ground. Digging begins. At first, the workers are still close enough to daylight that the shaft resembles an ordinary pit. Soil is loosened and passed upward. The hole deepens. The walls rise around the person below. Light narrows. A rope and container become essential. Every additional meter makes the surface more distant. The workers are not simply searching downward at random. They are testing a prediction about invisible geology. Perhaps neighbouring wells suggest water below. Perhaps vegetation indicates moisture. Perhaps the structure of the slope appears favourable. Still, the uncertainty must remain intense. Days of work can become weeks. The shaft may pass through layers of clay, gravel, compacted sediment, and stone. Each change in material provides information. Moisture may increase, the soil may cool. Finally, water begins to seep through. That moment is only the beginning. A usable qanat requires more than discovering wet ground. The source must supply enough flow, and its elevation must allow the planned tunnel to reach the destination. If the settlement lies too high, gravity cannot carry the water there. If the tunnel slope is misjudged, water may stagnate or rush destructively. The builders therefore have to understand two landscapes at once, the visible surface above and the invisible route below. This is where experience becomes engineering. Ancient surveyors do not possess lasers, digital elevation models, or satellite measurements, yet they can work with lines, levels, sighting methods, measuring rods, and practical techniques refined through repetition. Scholars still debate the exact procedures used in every early region, especially because construction traditions change across centuries. But surviving Qanat practices show that remarkably accurate gradients can be achieved using simple instruments in skilled hands. The required slope may be extremely gentle. Water must continue moving toward the outlet. But a tunnel that falls too sharply allows the current to gain speed. Fast water can erode the channel floor, weaken walls, and carry sediment into cultivated areas. A tunnel that is too flat risks poor flow and accumulation of debris. Precision is not a luxury. It determines whether the system lives. Once water is found and the route is judged possible, the desert surface begins to acquire its strange dotted line. Additional shafts are sunk along the planned path. These are not separate wells in the ordinary sense. They provide access to the future tunnel. Through them, workers descend, air enters, and excavated material is lifted to the surface. From one shaft to another, underground crews cut through the earth until the passages meet. The line of holes gradually stretches away from the hidden water source and toward dry land. From above, it may look almost absurdly modest compared with the effort involved. Small circles, low mounds of soil, a thin scar crossing an enormous plain. Yet each opening represents another calculated step in a project whose success depends on knowing where an unseen body of water lies beneath the mountains. Long before the first field turns green, the real conquest has already taken place. The builders have learned to look at a dry landscape and understand that its surface is telling only half the story. Once the groundwater is located and the route toward the plain appears possible, the scattered observations of generations become something far more ambitious. A well is useful, a spring is precious, but a tunnel capable of intercepting an underground water source and carrying it gently downhill can reorganize an entire region. This is the moment when the Qanat becomes more than a technique of survival. It becomes a system. Its earliest history is difficult to pin down with perfect certainty. Underground channels are notoriously hard to date because they remain in use, are repaired repeatedly, and often accumulate later modifications over older structures. A tunnel may have been cut in antiquity, cleaned in the medieval period, altered again under a later dynasty, and still carry water in modern times. Archaeologists searching for a clear beginning often find a structure whose physical history is layered and disturbed by the very maintenance that kept it alive. Scholars still debate precise origins and chronology, but ancient Iran is widely regarded as one of the central early landscapes in the development and spread of mature Qanat technology. The reasons are written into the geography. Across the Iranian plateau, large populations had to contend with arid and semi-arid conditions, irregular rainfall, powerful seasonal contrasts, and great distances between dependable surface water sources. Mountain systems collected snow and rain, while broad interior basins could remain desperately dry. The raw ingredients for Qanat construction existed together: elevated recharge zones, underground water moving through sediments, long slopes descending toward cultivable land, and communities with powerful incentives to convert hidden water into continuous flow. The first builders to perfect the method were not creating water, they were creating access. The mother well remained the heart of the project. From that deep shaft near the water-bearing layer, the tunnel had to extend gradually toward its destination. The builders faced a problem that seems simple when drawn on paper. 2 points are marked at different elevations. A line connects them. Water flows downhill. Beneath the desert, however, there is no clear view of the line. The workers cannot stand in the tunnel and see several kilometers ahead. They cannot remove the roof and check the route from above. Each section is cut through darkness, often by separate crews approaching from access shafts. For the system to succeed, those underground passages have to meet. A row of vertical shafts therefore becomes essential. Surveyors establish the route on the surface, and workers excavate shafts at intervals. Their spacing varies according to terrain, tunnel depth, soil stability, and construction tradition. Once a shaft reaches the planned tunnel level, diggers can work horizontally toward neighboring shafts. Earth and broken stone are loaded into containers and hauled upward. The spoil is often deposited around the opening, creating the circular mounds that still make Qanat routes recognizable from the air. The desert begins to show the shape of the hidden project before water ever reaches the settlement. There is something almost counterintuitive about the way construction proceeds. Modern observers often imagine a tunnel starting at one end and simply advancing forward. Qanat building can involve many points of access. Shafts divide a long subterranean route into manageable sections. They help ventilation, allow workers and tools to enter, and provide shorter paths for removing debris. If a problem develops, the builders do not always have to travel kilometers underground from a single entrance. The shafts are the reason the tunnel can grow. They are also the reason the tunnel can survive. Once a Qanat begins carrying water, silt can accumulate, sections can collapse, roots may enter shallow passages, earthquakes can damage walls. Without regular access, repairs would become nearly impossible. The same holes used during construction later allow maintenance crews to descend into the system. In that sense, the builders are not merely cutting an underground canal. They are constructing an infrastructure designed to be entered, cleaned, and renewed. The exact identity of the earliest Qanat builders remains uncertain. Ancient texts rarely provide the names of ordinary tunnel workers, and royal inscriptions are more likely to celebrate kings, victories, or divine favour than the men digging narrow passages beneath gravel plains. What survives in the records suggests specialised knowledge passed through communities and professional groups. Later traditions preserve skilled Qanat builders whose expertise combines surveying, geology, excavation, and an intimate understanding of groundwater. Such knowledge cannot easily be improvised. A failed surface wall can sometimes be rebuilt visibly. A failed underground gradient may reveal itself only after a long section has been completed. If the channel rises slightly where it should descend, water can pool behind the error. If the tunnel drops too rapidly, erosion may damage the floor. If workers misjudge the position of an adjacent shaft, 2 passages may miss one another in darkness. Accuracy has to be maintained using relatively simple equipment and enormous practical discipline. This is where the Qanat challenges modern assumptions about ancient engineering. Complexity does not always require complicated machinery. A wooden level, a plumb line, a measuring cord, and carefully repeated observations can produce remarkable results when used by people who understand their limitations. The technology may appear modest because its tools are modest. The achievement lies in procedure. Measurements are checked, slopes are estimated, excavated layers are examined. Crews learn from earlier channels. Knowledge is carried from one project to another. The gradual improvement of those methods may have been as important as the original concept itself. Perhaps early underground channels were short, exploiting nearby springs or shallow groundwater. Longer systems demanded better surveying and more organized labor. Deeper mother wells increased access to reliable supplies, but also increased danger. Expanded networks required rules for maintenance and water distribution. At some point, Qanat construction moved beyond isolated experimentation and became a repeatable engineering tradition. That transformation is difficult to witness archaeologically because it unfolds across generations. No surviving moment records the first builder standing beneath the desert and suddenly understanding the entire system. Innovation rarely works that neatly. More likely, practical discoveries accumulated. Miners already understood shafts and tunnels. Well, diggers understood groundwater. Farmers understood slope and irrigation. Communities understood the value of protecting water from evaporation. These streams of knowledge may have gradually converged. Some researchers have proposed connections between Qanat development and mining practices in ancient Iran, where workers needed to manage groundwater entering underground excavations. The idea is plausible because mining creates intimate familiarity with shafts, galleries, and water moving through rock. Yet direct proof for a single mining origin remains incomplete. No single explanation fully accounts for the technology's emergence. It may have developed through overlapping traditions rather than one isolated invention. What matters is what happens after the method becomes reliable. A successful Qanat can deliver water continuously without animal power or fuel. Day and night, the gradient continues to work. The flow may vary with groundwater conditions, but gravity never demands payment. Once the costly excavation is completed, the main requirement becomes protection and maintenance. That creates a strange imbalance between construction and operation. The beginning is brutally difficult. A community may invest years of labor before seeing the full reward. Workers dig in dangerous conditions. Surveyors accept the possibility of failure. Landowners or authorities organize resources for a project whose most important parts are invisible. But when water finally emerges from the tunnel outlet, the system begins operating with extraordinary quietness. There is no dramatic machine coming to life. The water simply appears. It leaves darkness and enters sunlight, flowing through a channel toward thirsty land. A place previously limited by wells or uncertain springs receives a steady supply. Fields can expand, trees can be planted, houses can be built where dependable water did not previously exist. The Qanat is born not in a palace or temple, but beneath the ground, one basket of earth at a time. And once people understand that hidden water can be made to travel, the scale of their ambition changes completely. The water may emerge quietly, but the labor required to bring it into daylight is anything but gentle. Beneath the desert, the Qanat is born in conditions that reduce engineering to its most physical form, a human body, a hand tool, a confined passage, and an enormous weight of earth overhead. The workers who cut these tunnels enter a world with almost none of the qualities that make the surface survivable. There is little light. Air may become stale. Space narrows around the shoulders. The sound of digging travels strangely through packed soil and stone. Every scrape of metal against the tunnel wall is also an inspection of the material holding the roof in place. The men who descend into these shafts are often specialists. Later traditions in Iran preserve the figure of the Muqani, the skilled Qanat digger whose occupation can pass through families and whose knowledge is measured not in abstract plans but in survival and functioning water. The exact organization of early crews remains uncertain, and scholars still debate how closely later documented practices resemble those of the first millennium BCE. Yet the basic hazards of underground excavation do not change much with dynasty. Gravity remains gravity. Loose sediment remains loose. A collapsing tunnel is indifferent to the name of the king above it. The descent itself can be unsettling. A worker is lowered through a vertical shaft that may drop far below the surface. The bright circle of sky contracts overhead. Depending on the shaft, his body may brush the walls. Tools and baskets follow on ropes. At the bottom, he enters a horizontal passage often barely large enough for a person to work. There is no need to excavate a comfortable corridor. Every extra centimetre requires more labour and creates more material to remove. Efficiency favours narrowness. The result can be a tunnel in which a worker crouches, kneels, or advances in a restricted posture for long periods. He loosens earth from the face of the passage. The debris is pulled backward and collected. Baskets or containers are carried to the nearest shaft and hauled upward, above ground. Another crew empties the spoil around the opening. This repeated movement explains the low rings and cones of excavated earth visible along many Qanat lines. Each mound is a portion of the underground missing from below. A long Qanat can therefore produce a strange inverted landscape. The tunnel itself cannot be seen, but its discarded interior is scattered across the surface. In firmer ground, the passage may hold its shape with little support. In weaker sediment, the roof can crack or crumble. Builders learn to recognize dangerous layers through experience. Changes in colour, texture, moisture, and the behaviour of the tunnel face all matter. Some sections may require reinforcement. Stone, brick, or other lining materials can protect vulnerable areas, especially where loose soils threaten repeated collapse. But lining kilometres of tunnel is expensive and laborious. Builders must decide where reinforcement is essential and where the earth can support itself. A wrong judgment can be fatal. Collapse is perhaps the most obvious danger, but it is not the only one. Deep excavation creates problems of ventilation. The access shafts help air circulate, yet conditions underground may still be difficult, especially in long sections or where several workers are active. Lamps consume oxygen and can fail. Heat at the surface may be extreme, while the tunnel maintains a cooler but damp atmosphere. Water entering the passage can turn the floor to mud in the source section. Where the tunnel meets the aquifer, sudden seepage or unstable saturated sediment may complicate excavation. The builder must reach water without allowing water to destroy the work. This balance is especially delicate near the mother well. Groundwater is the prize, but wet ground can lose strength. Sediment that appears stable when dry may behave differently once saturated. Crews need enough flow to supply the channel, yet uncontrolled inflow can make excavation dangerous and fill sections with debris. The evidence remains incomplete for the precise techniques used in the earlier systems. But surviving practices suggest a tradition built around cautious advance and constant attention to local ground conditions. The tools are simple enough to seem inadequate when compared with the scale of the result. Picks, short-handled digging implements, shovels or scoops, lamps, ropes, baskets, measuring devices. Yet simple tools have one major advantage in a narrow tunnel they fit. Large machinery would be useless in a passage designed around the width of a human body. Even today, maintenance of some traditional qanats can involve methods that would be immediately recognizable to workers from centuries ago. The technology is carried in the worker more than in the tool. He knows how a healthy tunnel sounds when struck. He understands which debris can be cleared quickly and which layer signals difficulty. He can judge whether moisture is increasing. He knows how to work without unnecessarily widening the passage. Most importantly, experienced crews understand that speed can be dangerous. Underground, impatience has consequences. One lesser-known feature of Qanat labour is the way the shafts divide both danger and logistics. A tunnel extending many kilometres does not force every basket of spoil to travel back to the entrance. Material is removed through the nearer shaft. Workers can be lowered closer to the excavation face. Surveying can be checked from multiple points. Crews may work on separate stretches of the route, gradually connecting them. But dividing the tunnel creates another challenge. The passages must join. Imagine two teams underground, one digging toward the other through opaque earth. Neither can see the approaching passage. Their world ends at the tunnel face. Above them, survey measurements determine direction. A small error can grow with distance. The longer the section between shafts, the greater the opportunity for misalignment. Skilled builders, therefore, use the vertical openings as fixed reference points in a larger geometric system. When the two passages meet correctly, the success may appear almost effortless after the fact. A continuous tunnel exists where once there was solid ground, but every connection represents accumulated accuracy, and every meter must preserve the gradient. This is the more subtle danger. A tunnel can remain standing and still fail as a qanat. Water is unforgiving of poor surveying. It exposes small errors through stagnation, sediment, and erosion. Builders may test the floor level as excavation advances. They may use simple water levels or sighting techniques according to period and tradition. Exact early methods vary, and no single explanation fully accounts for all regional practices, but the results demonstrate disciplined control. In some long systems, the difference in elevation across a great distance is remarkably modest. The water moves because the floor continues to fall, almost imperceptibly, toward the outlet. A worker crawling through the passage may not feel the slope, yet the water does. The work also produces a social world largely hidden from historical celebration. Monumental construction often leaves inscriptions naming patrons. Qanat workers are less visible in elite records. Their expertise can support towns, estates, and royal economies while their individual identities disappear. What survives in the record suggests that specialized digging communities gained reputations and sometimes inherited techniques across generations. A successful master builder could recognize a landscape others saw only as dry. Failure, however, remained close. A shaft rope could break. A section could collapse behind a worker. A misjudged layer could bury months of excavation. Poisonous or oxygen-poor air, though not equally common in every qanat, could create invisible risks. Floodwater entering an open shaft during a storm might damage sections. Earthquakes could shift or fracture tunnels. Even after completion, maintenance crews repeatedly returned to these hazards because a qanat left uncleared would slowly lose its flow. The system survives only because people keep entering the darkness. This is easy to forget when standing beside the outlet, where clear water emerges into sunlight and the engineering seems calm. The flowing channel hides the fear, exhaustion, and precision sealed behind it. Every green tree downstream depends on men who once lowered themselves through narrow holes and trusted the soil above their heads. The desert blooms at the surface, but the price is paid underground. Once a qanat begins to flow reliably, its influence spreads far beyond the tunnel itself. Water enters daylight at the edge of a settlement or agricultural zone, and from that point the invisible engineering beneath the desert becomes a visible pattern of fields, orchards, walls, pathways, and houses. What began as a narrow passage through earth now determines where people live, what they grow, and how large their communities can become. The underground channel is not merely supplying water to an existing landscape, it is creating a new human landscape above it. The first changes may be modest. A few plots receive irrigation. Grain survives a dry season that would otherwise destroy it. Small gardens appear near houses. Livestock can be watered more regularly. Families who once depended on uncertain wells or seasonal runoff gain a more dependable supply. Stability encourages permanence, and permanence encourages investment. A farmer plants trees whose value will not be realized for years because he expects water to continue arriving. Mud brick walls rise around orchards, storage buildings expand, paths become streets. The settlement begins to trust the tunnel. That trust can transform isolated communities into larger centers of population. Across arid parts of ancient Iran, surface rivers are unevenly distributed, and many areas cannot support intensive farming on rainfall alone. A functioning qanat allows groundwater from the margins of mountains and uplands to reach lower land where broad areas can be cultivated. The amount of water available varies enormously from one system to another, and no qanat can support unlimited growth. But a continuous gravity-fed flow can provide a kind of reliability that seasonal water sources cannot. This matters especially in years when rain fails. A qanat still depends ultimately on groundwater recharge, and prolonged drought can weaken its flow. It is not immune to climate, yet groundwater often responds more slowly than a shallow pond or seasonal stream. Water stored in sediments may continue moving through the system after the surface has dried. In a harsh environment, even a temporary buffer can mean the difference between crop failure and survival. The result is a remarkable form of settlement geography. Towns and villages appear in places that seem, to an outsider, poorly chosen. They may stand far from major rivers. The surrounding plain may be dusty and nearly treeless. Yet beneath the surface, a carefully positioned tunnel connects the community to a distant recharge zone. The mountains feed the town without touching it. As qanat technology becomes established, rulers and landowners recognize its value. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, emerging in the first millennium BCE and eventually controlling an enormous territory, governs regions with radically different environments. Some areas possess great rivers, others depend on local springs, wells, and seasonal water. The Persian world cannot rely on one single method of irrigation, and scholars still debate the exact scale and chronology of qanat expansion under early imperial rule. What survives in the record suggests, however, that underground water systems become deeply associated with settlement and agriculture across Iranian lands and later spread far beyond them. Imperial power does not necessarily invent the technology it uses. More often, empires identify useful local practices, protect them, encourage them, tax the prosperity they create, and carry knowledge into new regions. A qanat is perfectly suited to this process. It increases the productive value of dry land. Productive land supports taxpayers. It feeds soldiers, craftsmen, administrators, and animals. It can sustain way stations and communities along routes crossing difficult terrain. Water becomes infrastructure for power. An army marching through desert cannot drink promises of imperial greatness. Horses and pack animals need actual water. Garrisons require food. Roads become strategically meaningful only if people can survive along them. Qanat-fed settlements can therefore contribute to a wider network of imperial control, even when the tunnels themselves are never mentioned in accounts of famous campaigns. This is the hidden character of the system. A palace may symbolize an empire, but the palace consumes resources produced elsewhere. Grain comes from fields, fruit comes from orchards, taxes come from working communities. The Qanat operates below these visible structures, turning groundwater into agricultural capacity. Its contribution is quiet but persistent. In some areas, water from the underground channel first enters a main surface canal and is then divided into smaller branches. The location of fields relative to the outlet matters. Higher land may be impossible to irrigate because the water cannot flow upward. The entire agricultural zone develops below the point where the Qanat emerges. From the air, cultivated land can spread outward like a green extension of the invisible tunnel. This physical limitation shapes settlement planning. Houses may cluster near distribution channels. Gardens occupy valuable watered ground. Fields are arranged according to slope. Water flows through one property toward another, making cooperation and conflict nearly unavoidable. A single family may own a portion of the flow, while several households depend on the same system. The precise legal arrangements vary by place and period, but the underlying problem is ancient. There is more dry land than water. Every drop has a destination. The continuous nature of the flow introduces another challenge. Water does not pause at night because farmers are asleep. It does not stop during a religious ceremony or wait until a landowner returns. If a qanat is flowing, its supply must be directed, stored where possible, or allowed to continue through the distribution system. Communities develop schedules and rules for dividing access. Time itself can become a measure of water ownership. One farmer may receive the flow for a certain period before a gate is adjusted and the water passes to another field. In later documented traditions, water shares can be measured with extraordinary care, sometimes using simple timing devices or the movement of the sun and stars. Such practices may not have been identical in every ancient settlement, and the evidence remains incomplete. But they reveal how a physical channel becomes a social institution. The Qanat creates cooperation because neglect by one group can harm many others. A collapsed section upstream affects every user below. Silt left uncleared reduces the entire flow. A damaged shaft can complicate repairs. Maintenance therefore requires organization. Labor must be gathered, specialists paid or supported, and access to rights negotiated. A wealthy estate may possess enough resources to manage its own system. A village may depend on collective responsibility. The tunnel links people who may otherwise disagree about almost everything. This dependence also gives water managers and owners influence. Control of the source can become control of the settlement's future. Land without water has limited value. Land connected to a functioning qanat can support generations. Ownership rights, maintenance obligations, and distribution schedules become part of local economic life. Yet the greatest effect remains visible in the simplest scenes. A child grows up beneath the shade of a tree in a place where trees survive only because water has travelled underground for kilometres. A farmer harvests grain whose roots draw moisture delivered from distant mountain precipitation. Grapevines climb walls, pomegranates, figs, and other crops suited to local conditions may flourish where unmanaged desert lies only a short distance away. The contrast can be abrupt. Beyond the last irrigated field, the land returns to dust and stone. The boundary between cultivated life and aridity may follow the reach of the water almost exactly. It becomes possible to stand with one foot near green growth and look outward across terrain that appears incapable of supporting it. This is how the desert begins to bloom, not through a single miraculous transformation, but through controlled strips and islands of fertility tied to hidden channels. Each qanat extends the limits of settlement a little farther. Each successful tunnel makes another piece of dry land productive, and as those green zones multiply, the underground water system begins feeding something larger than villages. It begins feeding empires. The empire fed by Qanats does not announce itself with borders on a map. It appears instead as green interruptions in a landscape of dust. From a distance, an irrigated settlement can look almost impossible. Poplar trees rise above flat roofs, vines cling to garden walls, fields hold a darker colour than the surrounding plain. The contrast is not gradual. Beyond the reach of water, vegetation thins rapidly and the desert resumes. Inside the watered zone, however, the land has been reorganised with extraordinary care. Water leaving the Qanat outlet rarely wanders freely. It enters a system of channels designed to carry it past houses and into cultivated ground. Some channels remain open to the sky, others pass beneath walls or streets. Small gates, barriers, and diversions control where the flow travels. The landscape slopes gently, and every branch of the network depends on that slope. A farmer cannot simply place a field wherever he wishes. The field must exist where gravity agrees to deliver water. This creates an agricultural world shaped by elevation. Closest to the main water supply, valuable gardens and orchards may occupy carefully protected ground. Farther away, channels divide and spread across larger fields. Local arrangements vary, as do crops and ownership systems. But one principle remains constant: water must be used before it escapes, evaporates, or sinks beyond reach. In extreme aridity, irrigation is not merely the act of adding moisture to soil, it is the management of scarcity. A field can receive too little water and fail. It can also receive too much. Poor drainage may raise salts toward the surface as water evaporates, gradually damaging the soil. This problem has challenged irrigated societies across dry regions for thousands of years. Qanats do not automatically eliminate salinization, and no single explanation fully accounts for the success or decline of every agricultural settlement built around them. But their relatively steady flows can allow careful distribution where local knowledge and maintenance remain strong. Farmers learn the character of their ground. They know which soils absorb water quickly and which hold it. They recognize the signs of salt. They understand that young trees need different attention from mature orchards. They schedule irrigation according to season, crop, and the size of the water share available. Written agricultural manuals from later periods reveal sophisticated traditions of cultivation across the Iranian and Islamic worlds. But much practical knowledge never enters books. It survives in habit. A gate is opened at the right hour. Water darkens a narrow channel and moves into a plot. Dry soil drinks rapidly at first. The flow spreads between planted rows. A farmer watches the edge advance, blocking one path and opening another. The process may appear slow, but multiplied across hundreds of fields and generations, it transforms the visual character of entire settlements. Wheat and barley provide basic food where conditions permit. Grapes grow in many Iranian environments and can be consumed fresh, dried into raisins, or processed in other ways according to period and culture. Pomegranates thrive in regions where irrigation and climate suit them. Figs, melons, and various fruits add diversity. In colder uplands, crops differ from those in warmer basins. The Qanat is not attached to one agricultural package. Its value lies in allowing communities to adapt water delivery to local conditions. Trees are especially important. An orchard is a commitment to the future. Grain may be planted and harvested within a season, but a fruit tree takes years to mature. Planting one is an act of confidence in continuing access to land and water. A large orchard therefore represents more than agricultural productivity. It reflects a belief that the channel will be maintained, rights respected, and the settlement still occupied when the tree reaches full size. Shade becomes another crop, though it is rarely counted that way. In a hot, dry climate, trees alter the experience of a settlement. Their leaves intercept sunlight. Moisture released by vegetation affects the immediate air. Walls and gardens create cooler pockets. Narrow lanes may be positioned within a built environment where shade lasts longer than it would on an open plain. The difference between the desert outside and the cultivated interior can be felt on the skin. Some communities develop gardens whose design treats water as both a practical resource and a visible symbol of order. Channels divide cultivated spaces. Trees are planted in deliberate arrangements. Flowing water cools and animates enclosed areas. Later Persian garden traditions become famous for their geometry and controlled use of water, influencing landscapes far beyond Iran. Their history is complex and evolves across many centuries, but the environmental foundation is ancient. In a dry land, the ability to make water appear where it is needed carries enormous cultural power. A flowing channel says that chaos has been temporarily disciplined. The desert remains outside the wall. Drought remains possible. The aquifer can decline. Tunnels can collapse. Yet inside the garden, water moves along a chosen path. One of the most surprising effects of Qanat irrigation is how localized abundance can conceal regional harshness. A traveller resting beneath trees in a watered settlement may eat fruit grown only a short distance from barren ground. The fertility feels natural because the trees are mature and the fields have existed for generations. But remove the tunnel, and the appearance of permanence becomes an illusion. The green landscape is an engineered surface. Even wild-looking vegetation may depend indirectly on water escaping channels or seeping into nearby soils. Animals gather where water is available. Birds find trees and insects. Gardens create small habitats that would be scarce on the surrounding plain. Human water management unintentionally produces islands of biological activity. The system can also support crops beyond immediate subsistence. Where enough water and land are available, agricultural surplus enters markets. Dried fruit can travel. Grain can be stored. Wine production occurs in some historical periods and communities. Fibers, herbs, and specialized garden products may contribute to local economies. The exact combination changes through time, but the underlying chain is clear. Groundwater becomes flowing water. Flowing water becomes crops. Crops become food, trade, taxes, and population. Nothing about that chain is guaranteed. A growing settlement places increasing pressure on its supply. More fields invite more claims. A prosperous orchard may encourage cultivation farther downstream, where the flow is weaker. Water divided among too many users can become insufficient for everyone. The success of the Qanat therefore produces its own tension. The more life gathers round the channel, the more valuable every hour of flow becomes. Communities respond through intricate customs. Water shares may be inherited, purchased, divided, or attached to land according to local systems. In some documented Iranian traditions, the right to use water is allocated by time. A person's wealth may be expressed not only in hectares of soil, but in minutes or hours of access to the Qanat's flow. This creates a strange form of ownership. No one can hold a moving stream in his hands, yet society can divide it. For a certain period, the water belongs to one field. Then a barrier shifts, and the same flow belongs somewhere else. The molecules do not know ownership has changed. The channel does. At night, Irrigation may continue beneath stars because the schedule does not disappear with daylight. Farmers or water managers track turns. In later periods, timekeeping methods can involve water clocks and other simple but effective devices. Local practices differ, and scholars still debate how far particular documented customs can be projected into deeper antiquity. What survives in the record suggests, however, that precise water allocation becomes an essential skill in many Qanat communities. The blooming desert is therefore not merely the result of clever excavation, it is the product of constant discipline above ground. Channels are cleared, schedules are remembered, disputes are settled, fields are shaped to accept the flow, trees are planted where future water is expected. Each generation inherits not just a tunnel, but a system of behavior built around it, seen from the empty plain. The green settlement may resemble an oasis created by nature. It is something more complicated. It is landscape continuously negotiated between mountain snow, underground geology, gravity, engineering, and human patience. The desert has not been defeated. It has simply been persuaded, within narrow boundaries, to support another kind of world. And holding those boundaries in place requires a level of precision hidden inside every drop. The precision hidden inside every drop begins with a nearly invisible fact. Water does not need a dramatic slope to move. It needs only a continuous descent. A qanat may travel across kilometers of dry land while losing elevation so gradually that the surface above appears almost flat. To the eye, the desert seems level. Beneath it, however, the tunnel floor falls by a carefully controlled amount, meter after meter, guiding water toward daylight. This is the hidden mathematics of the Qanat. The builders do not need to describe the movement in modern hydraulic equations to understand its consequences. They observe. Water placed on a surface reveals direction. Channels with steep gradients behave differently from shallow ones. Fast currents cut into soft earth and carry debris. Slow currents deposit sediment. Standing water marks failure. Generations of construction turn these observations into practical rules. A Qanat surveyor must begin by comparing two worlds. On the surface, he sees mountains, ridges, depressions, and broad plains. Underground, he must imagine the elevation of the water-bearing layer and the route of a tunnel that does not yet exist. The source must be high enough for the water to descend toward the intended outlet. If the destination lies above the hydraulic path, no amount of careful digging will persuade gravity to reverse itself. The first calculation is therefore brutally simple: is the project physically possible? A promising aquifer may contain abundant water and still be useless to a particular village if it lies too low. Another source with a smaller flow may be more valuable because its elevation permits delivery to a wide agricultural zone. The builders are not merely searching for water, they are searching for water in the correct geometric relationship with the land. Once the route is chosen, maintaining the gradient becomes a constant challenge. The tunnel cannot rise unexpectedly. Even a poorly executed short stretch may slow the flow and encourage sediment to gather. Yet excessive descent creates its own danger. Water accelerates, attacking the channel floor and the sides of the passage. In weak material, erosion can undermine the structure. A rapidly deepening tunnel also creates practical problems farther along the route. If the channel drops too quickly near the source, it may remain unnecessarily deep beneath the plain, requiring longer shafts and far more excavation before reaching the surface. Every extra meter of depth has a price. A shaft must be dug through that meter. Soil must be lifted from below. Workers must travel farther. Ventilation and access become harder. The elegant solution is to preserve the smallest useful descent, allowing gravity to move the water while keeping the tunnel as high as safely possible. This balance may be measured in tiny changes spread across enormous distances. Scholars still debate the exact surveying instruments and procedures used during the earliest phases of Qanat construction. Later traditions provide much clearer evidence for specialized techniques, including leveling devices, sighting methods, cords, rods, and simple instruments that use water itself to establish a horizontal reference. What survives in the record suggests that experienced builders can achieve striking accuracy without anything resembling modern electronic equipment. The surprising detail is that simplicity can improve reliability. A hanging plumb line always responds to gravity. Still water naturally establishes a level surface. A straight cord stretched between fixed points provides a reference. None of these devices requires a written numerical model to be useful. Their accuracy depends on careful handling, repeated checking, and the ability to recognize accumulated error. The surveyor's greatest enemy is often not a large mistake. It is a small mistake repeated many times. An error of only a few centimeters may seem meaningless at one shaft. But if similar errors continue in the same direction over a long tunnel, the final route can drift badly from its intended level. Ancient builders therefore need procedures that limit accumulation. Measurements are compared between access points. Shafts provide known positions from the surface. The tunnel is cut in sections, allowing crews to correct direction and elevation before a mistake grows across kilometers. Those vertical shafts create a geometric bridge between sunlight and darkness. On the surface, their positions can be aligned along the proposed route. Below, each shaft becomes a fixed point through which the tunnel must pass. A worker at the bottom knows the neck section must reach a neighboring shaft at a particular level. The entire Qanat is therefore broken into a sequence of smaller surveying problems. The method is efficient because it turns an impossible view into manageable intervals. No builder needs to see the full underground route at once. He needs enough accuracy to connect one controlled point to the next while preserving the overall descent. Direction is only one concern. The character of the tunnel floor also influences flow. Rough surfaces resist water differently from smooth ones. Loose debris can create small dams. Collapsed material narrows the channel. Roots or mineral deposits may disturb a section. Maintenance is partly an effort to restore the mathematical assumptions of the original design. The gradient may still be correct, but water cannot behave as intended if the passage is obstructed. This is why a qanat is not a static object. It is a continuously adjusted relationship between earth and water. Flow itself provides information. Experienced workers can observe changes in speed, depth, and clarity. An unusual reduction may indicate blockage or damage upstream. Muddy water may suggest fresh collapse or erosion. Variations in discharge can reveal changes at the source. The Qanat speaks through its water, though interpreting that language requires familiarity built over years. The water also imposes a natural ceiling on ambition. A channel can carry only what the aquifer supplies. Widening the outlet does not magically create more groundwater. Extending fields cannot command the mother well to produce additional flow. The system's geometry is precise, but its source remains environmental. Snowfall, rainfall, recharge, and underground conditions ultimately determine the available volume. This limitation may be one of the Qanat's most important characteristics. Unlike a powerful mechanical pump, a gravity-fed channel cannot easily extract groundwater from far below its natural drainage level. It intercepts water and allows part of the underground flow to emerge at a lower elevation. This does not make every qanat automatically sustainable. Dense systems and changing recharge can still place pressure on water resources. Yet traditional qanats often operate within constraints imposed by elevation and natural flow. Gravity is both the engine and the limit. Modern pumps can ignore that limit for a time. They can pull water from greater depths and deliver it uphill. The ancient qanat cannot. Its builders must negotiate with the shape of the land. That negotiation extends beyond the tunnel outlet. Surface canals continue the work of geometry. A distribution channel must reach a field at the correct elevation. Agricultural plots may be leveled or shaped so water spreads effectively. Small barriers redirect flow. An irrigation network becomes a branching map of controlled descent, each division reducing or redirecting the original stream. A person walking through a qanat-fed settlement may never notice the calculations embedded in the ground. He sees a channel beside a wall. Water passes beneath a path. A garden receives its turn. Farther away, another branch reaches a field. Yet the entire arrangement depends on thousands of elevation decisions. The mother well is positioned relative to an aquifer. The tunnel descends relative to the outlet. The outlet stands above the cultivated zone. The surface canals descend through individual properties. A mistake at the beginning can affect everything downstream. This gives experienced builders enormous importance. Their skill cannot be replaced simply by gathering more labourers. 1,000 men digging in the wrong direction only create a larger failure. Knowledge must lead effort. Perhaps that is why qanats can feel almost mysterious to those encountering them without understanding their construction. The visible technology appears too simple for the result. There are holes in the ground, a narrow tunnel, and flowing water, no monumental machinery, no obvious source of power. But the true machine is the gradient. It stretches invisibly from mountain aquifer to desert field. Earth forms its body. Gravity supplies its motion. Human measurement gives it direction. And once that hidden line has been drawn accurately beneath the landscape, control of the water flowing along it becomes a source of wealth and power that no ruler can afford to ignore. Once water begins to move reliably beneath the desert settlement, it acquires a second life above ground. It becomes more than a physical resource. It becomes wealth that can be measured, inherited, disputed, taxed, and controlled. A qanat may have been engineered according to the quiet laws of gravity, but the society built around it is governed by far less predictable forces. Families compete, land changes hands, rulers seek revenue, communities argue over maintenance. The water continues downhill, indifferent to ownership, while people build entire systems of power around deciding who may use it and when. In an arid environment, land without dependable water can be nearly worthless for intensive agriculture. Add a reliable share of qanat flow, and the same ground may support wheat, vines, orchards, and generations of household wealth. This difference gives water rights extraordinary importance. Ownership of a field does not always mean unrestricted access to the channel that feeds it. In many documented qanat societies, land and water rights can be separated, divided, bought, inherited, or attached to specific periods of use. Time becomes property. A household may possess the right to divert the flow for a set interval. Another family receives the water afterward. The schedule can continue through daylight and darkness, because the qanat does not stop flowing when the village sleeps. In later Iranian communities, complex systems develop for measuring these turns, sometimes with water clocks and trained timekeepers. The precise form of ancient arrangements remains difficult to reconstruct, and scholars still debate how far later customs can be projected backward. But the basic need for organized allocation must be as old as shared irrigation itself. A continuous stream serving many users demands rules. Without them, the most powerful landholder upstream could simply take more than his share. A farmer might secretly extend an irrigation turn. A damaged gate could redirect water toward one estate and leave another dry. Small changes measured in minutes can decide whether a crop receives enough moisture during a critical period. This makes the water schedule a form of local law. Someone must remember the divisions. Someone must settle disagreements. Someone must inspect the channels and determine whether a shortage is caused by drought, damage, or theft. The authority responsible may be a community official, a landowner, a specialist manager, or a combination of local institutions depending on period and place. No single political model governs every Qanat society. But what survives in the record suggests that water management often produces highly structured systems of responsibility. The reason is simple: disorder is expensive. A dispute over a road may inconvenience a village. A dispute over irrigation can destroy a harvest. This gives those who control major water sources significant influence. Wealthy estates may finance the excavation of new qanats. Rulers, nobles, religious institutions, and urban elites can invest in water infrastructure because successful channels increase the value of land below them. The initial cost is high, but the long-term rewards can be substantial. Productive fields yield rents, orchards support trade, settlements generate taxes. A tunnel under the desert can become an instrument of political expansion. A ruler does not need to conquer new territory with armies alone. If dry land can be supplied with water, new agricultural zones emerge. People settle. Roads become easier to support. Imperial administration can extend into regions where permanent communities were previously limited. This relationship between water and authority appears in different forms across the Persian world, and later states that inherit or expand Qanat traditions. Some rulers encourage the construction and repair of underground channels. Certain legal and fiscal incentives are associated in historical sources with bringing uncultivated land into production, though details vary and later accounts must be used cautiously when reconstructing earlier centuries. The political logic is obvious. A dry plain produces little taxable surplus. A Qanat-fed plain may produce grain for decades. Yet the same infrastructure that strengthens authority can create dependence. A settlement tied to one major Qanat becomes vulnerable to anyone capable of controlling or damaging it. Water systems are difficult to defend because much of their route crosses open country. The vertical shafts clearly mark the line of the tunnel. An enemy who understands the system does not need to attack every field. Blocking a critical section upstream can reduce the flow below. The empire beneath the ground has weak points. In times of conflict, irrigation networks can be neglected or deliberately damaged. Armies moving through agricultural regions sometimes destroy crops and water infrastructure to weaken opponents. The exact role of Qanat sabotage varies across wars and historical periods, and the evidence remains incomplete for many specific claims. But underground channels are not immune to violence. Their hidden position offers some protection from heat and evaporation, not from human intention. Control can also be less dramatic and more bureaucratic. A government may record irrigated land because water transforms its productivity. Tax collectors care about crops, yields, and ownership. Administrators care about which estates can support soldiers or supply cities. Local elites care about the legal documents establishing their shares of flow. A Qanat therefore leaves traces not only in archaeology but in contracts, property arrangements, court disputes, and systems of taxation. The water's value becomes visible in paperwork long after the original diggers disappear. One surprising detail is how fragmented ownership can become. A single qanat may serve many shareholders, each possessing a portion of the total flow. Over generations, inheritance can divide those shares into smaller units. A water right that once belonged to one person may eventually be split among descendants. The tunnel remains physically continuous while its social ownership becomes increasingly complicated. This can create an almost invisible map of power. Two neighbouring families may cultivate similar fields, yet one controls a larger water share. A merchant living elsewhere may own part of the flow. A religious foundation may receive income from land irrigated by a particular channel. A wealthy household may purchase water rights from a struggling farmer. The landscape cannot be understood by looking at soil alone. The real boundaries are moving through the canals. Water can even influence settlement hierarchy. Communities near major, dependable qanats may become local centres of trade. Larger populations support craftsmen and markets. Administrative buildings appear. Wealth accumulates where agricultural surpluses are reliable. Smaller settlements with weaker flows remain vulnerable to dry years. The distribution of groundwater below the surface begins shaping the distribution of political importance above it. Yet no ruler, however powerful, can simply decree that a qanat continue working forever. The tunnel demands maintenance. Silt must be cleared. Collapsed sections must be reopened. Shafts must remain accessible. Skilled workers must be available. This produces a limit on political control that is easy to overlook. Authority can claim the water. Only labour can preserve the channel. If a ruler taxes a community too heavily, villagers may lack resources for repairs. If warfare removes workers, maintenance declines. If land ownership becomes fragmented beyond practical coordination, organising collective labour becomes harder. A system built over decades can weaken through a sequence of small failures. The qanat therefore links political stability to technical care. A prosperous government may support large repair projects. Strong local institutions may coordinate maintenance even when central authority is weak. In other places, the collapse of administration can leave channels choked and abandoned. No single explanation fully accounts for every qanat's fate. But the connection between social organisation and water flow is impossible to ignore. The tunnel is a test of cooperation disguised as engineering. Its builders may solve the gradient once. Every later generation must solve ownership again. Who pays for repairs? Who receives the flow first? How are new fields included? What happens when water declines? Can one shareholder sell his rights? Who decides whether a new branch canal is permitted? These are not secondary questions. They determine whether the green landscape survives. And as qanat networks multiply beneath towns, estates, and agricultural plains, their combined scale becomes difficult to comprehend. What appears above ground as a collection of separate villages is connected to a far larger invisible structure, thousands of shafts, countless tunnels, and entire economies organised around rivers that never see the sun. The true scale of the qanat world becomes visible only when the landscape is viewed from a distance. On the ground, a person sees one shaft, then another. A village receives water from a single outlet. A farmer knows the channel that feeds his own fields, yet from above the pattern changes. Lines of circular depressions and low earth mounds stretch across plains for kilometres. Some run nearly straight from mountain margins towards settlements. Others divide the dry country into faint geometric traces. One line disappears beneath a town while another bends toward cultivated land. Beyond it, A second system follows a different slope. Then a third. The desert is not empty. It is crossed by an underground infrastructure almost entirely concealed from anyone standing on its surface. This is the empire beneath the empire. The phrase is not literal in the sense of a single centrally planned network connecting every settlement. Qanats are individual systems, constructed in different periods by different communities, landowners, institutions, and rulers. Some serve villages, others supply agricultural estates or towns. Their histories overlap unevenly. The evidence remains incomplete for the original dates of many tunnels, yet when thousands of systems are considered together, they form something resembling an invisible hydraulic civilization. Roads can be seen, city walls can be mapped from ruins, palaces leave foundations large enough to impress archaeologists centuries later. Qanats challenge the imagination because their main architecture is negative space. They are places where soil has been removed. Their monument is a narrow darkness extending through the earth, and that darkness can be astonishingly long. Some qanats travel only short distances, others extend for tens of kilometers, depending on terrain and the location of groundwater. Their mother wells may descend deep near the source, while the tunnel slowly approaches the surface farther downslope. Along the route, hundreds or even thousands of access shafts may mark a single system. Multiply that by the many qanats built across Iran and neighbouring regions over centuries, and the amount of excavation becomes enormous. Every metre is dug by human labour. The volume of soil removed from a long qanat may be spread in modest piles around shafts, making the total effort difficult to appreciate. Gather all that earth in one place, and the scale would seem far more dramatic. Instead, the desert absorbs the evidence. Wind softens the mounds. New paths cross them. Some shafts collapse and become shallow pits. Agriculture covers sections near settlements. Modern roads cut through old lines. The infrastructure fades precisely because it was designed not to dominate the surface. This hidden character gives qanats a strategic importance very different from monumental buildings. A palace may represent authority, but a qanat can determine whether the population supporting that authority eats. A temple may stand for centuries after its community disappears, while a neglected water tunnel can fail within years or decades depending on local conditions. The visible monument often outlives its practical purpose. The invisible infrastructure must remain active to matter. That difference shapes how history is remembered. Ancient rulers tend to survive in text because courts produce records. Wars survive because chroniclers describe them. Monumental architecture survives because stone resists decay. The routines that keep ordinary settlements alive are less dramatic. Cleaning sediment from a tunnel rarely enters a royal inscription. Repairing a collapsed shaft does not become an epic. Yet these repeated actions may have supported far more people than the construction of celebrated ceremonial buildings. The contradiction is almost uncomfortable. Civilizations are remembered through what they displayed, but they survived through what they maintained. Qanats belong to the second category. Imagine a large region dotted with settlements, each dependent on water arriving from beneath the ground. The systems are physically separate, yet they create similar obligations everywhere. Skilled workers must remain available. Water shares require management. Agricultural schedules follow the flow. Local economies depend on maintenance. In dry years, reduced discharge becomes a community concern. In periods of conflict, damage to the system becomes a threat to survival. The qanat therefore creates a shared form of vulnerability across great distances. A city may consider itself politically important, while a small group of tunnel workers performs the task that keeps its gardens alive. A wealthier state may display imported luxury goods while its productive value still depends on a passage narrow enough that a man must crouch to repair it. The most sophisticated layer of society rests, quite literally, above workers moving through mud and darkness. One lesser-known aspect of this infrastructure is that underground water does not always serve agriculture first. Depending on the settlement, Qanat water may be directed toward domestic use before reaching fields. Water can pass through neighborhoods, storage structures, gardens, and public facilities. The order of use matters because cleanliness declines as the water moves through human activity. Communities develop local rules about where drinking water is collected and where washing or other uses occur. In some towns, water enters underground spaces where the cooler environment provides relief from summer heat. Storage reservoirs can help manage supply. Later architectural traditions develop sophisticated systems associated with Qanat water, including cisterns and underground chambers adapted to local climates. These structures belong to different periods and cannot all be projected backward into early antiquity. But they reveal how one water technology can influence architecture far beyond irrigation. The tunnel begins shaping the city vertically. There is the visible settlement at street level. Beneath it may lie channels carrying water. Below houses, stairs descend toward access points. Underground storage spaces take advantage of cooler temperatures. Farther away, the Qanat itself continues toward the aquifer. Human life occupies layers. The desert surface, so visually dominant, is only the upper boundary of a much larger inhabited system. This layered landscape is difficult for conquerors and travelers to understand immediately. A newcomer may see fertile fields and assume a nearby spring or river supports them. The true source can lie many kilometers away. Knowledge of the tunnel route belongs to local communities and specialists. Lose that knowledge, and repair becomes harder. The line of shafts offers guidance, but not a complete explanation. Which section is unstable? Where does sediment usually gather? How has the water level changed? Which branches are older? Experienced workers carry a mental map built from repeated descent. When those workers die without successors, part of the infrastructure disappears before the tunnel itself collapses. This makes Qanat knowledge a form of intangible engineering. The physical channel is only half the system. The other half exists in memory techniques for surveying, repair, water division, and interpreting changes in flow. No single explanation fully accounts for why some Qanats survive for centuries while others are abandoned relatively quickly. Geology matters, political stability matters, climate matters, economic value matters, local cooperation matters. A system with favorable conditions and strong maintenance can endure through multiple dynasties. Another may fail after a major collapse makes repair too costly. The underground empire is therefore constantly changing. New tunnels are cut, old ones are extended. Some mother wells deepen as groundwater conditions shift. Branches are altered. Abandoned qanats become dry cavities beneath the land. In some regions, later builders may work near earlier systems, creating layers of infrastructure from different periods. The desert accumulates dead waterways. Their shafts remain like fossilized tracks across the surface. For archaeologists, these lines can reveal where people once attempted to create productive landscapes. A dry qanat may point toward a settlement that has vanished. It can preserve the memory of an agricultural zone now returned to aridity. Remote sensing and aerial imagery make some patterns easier to identify, but dating them remains challenging. What survives in the record suggests a landscape repeatedly engineered. abandoned, and engineered again. This is why the Qanat network cannot be understood as a single ancient achievement frozen in time. It is a living and dying infrastructure. For centuries, underground channels expand the possibilities of settlement across dry lands. They support communities that might otherwise remain small or seasonal. They connect mountain water to desert economies. Their influence reaches into property, architecture, taxation, and political power. And then the knowledge begins to travel. The same principle appears farther west and farther east, adapted to new languages, soils, climates, and political systems. The underground river leaves the Iranian plateau and enters a much wider world. The underground river does not remain confined to one plateau. Once communities understand that groundwater can be intercepted at higher ground and carried through a gently descending tunnel, the principle is too useful to belong to one region forever. People move, armies cross deserts, merchants follow long roads between cities, engineers enter the service of new rulers, prisoners and workers are relocated. Empires absorb older settlements and inherit the practical knowledge hidden beneath them. Somewhere in that constant movement, the Qanat begins one of the ancient world's least visible technological journeys. Its path is difficult to reconstruct in perfect sequence. A clay vessel can be compared by style. A coin may carry a ruler's name. A written text can sometimes be dated to a reign. Underground water galleries are less cooperative. Similar systems can be repaired until their earliest form disappears. Different societies may develop related techniques independently or modify ideas received from neighbours. Even terminology changes. The word Qanat becomes widely used in modern discussion, but underground channels appear under other names. Karez or Keres in parts of Central and South Asia, Falaj in Arabia, Fagara in North Africa, and terms linked to subterranean galleries farther west. Scholars still debate the precise relationship between every one of these traditions, yet the broad pattern is unmistakable. The idea of using a gently sloping underground channel to tap groundwater spreads across a remarkable portion of the dry old world. The expansion of Persian imperial power provides one important context. The Achaemenid Empire controls territory stretching across regions of Western and Central Asia and into northeastern Africa. Such a vast political system brings administrators, soldiers, craftsmen, and local populations into new relationships. Technologies do not travel only because rulers issue commands. They move because people encounter working solutions to familiar problems. A dry province sees what another dry province has achieved. The attraction is obvious. In regions where evaporation is severe, an open surface canal can lose valuable water before reaching its destination. A subterranean channel protects much of the flow. Where animal-powered lifting limits irrigation from deep wells, gravity offers continuous movement. Where settlements lie below mountain aquifers, the terrain itself provides the necessary energy. But a Qanat cannot simply be copied like a decorative pattern. The geology must cooperate. This is one reason the technology changes as it travels. Builders entering a new landscape must understand local sediments, water tables, slopes, and recharge. A method successful on an Iranian alluvial fan may need alteration in the limestone terrain of another region. Shaft spacing changes, tunnel depth changes, reinforcement methods differ. The length of the channel is dictated by the relationship between source and settlement. The principle travels more easily than the exact design. To the west, underground water galleries become associated with regions that fall under or interact with Persian, Hellenistic, Roman, Byzantine, and later Islamic political worlds. Claims that every underground channel in these areas derives directly from one Persian origin can be too simple. The evidence remains incomplete, and local traditions matter. Still, long-distance exchange almost certainly helps spread specialized knowledge. In Egypt and the Western deserts, underground water management takes forms suited to oasis environments. Across North Africa, especially in Saharan and pre-Saharan regions, Foggara systems develop into elaborate networks. Lines of shafts cross dry ground toward cultivated oases, carrying water without pumps. The visual resemblance to Iranian qanats is striking because the physical problem is similar. A mountain or elevated aquifer holds hidden water. A settlement waits below. Between them lies dry land. In North African oases, these underground channels support date palms, gardens, and carefully layered agriculture. Tall palms provide shade. Beneath them, fruit trees may grow. Lower still, vegetables and other crops occupy protected soil. The exact arrangements vary by location, but the use of scarce water can become intensely efficient. The desert garden returns in a new language. Across the Arabian Peninsula, village systems also carry water through channels, including underground sections in some traditions. Oman becomes particularly famous for its historic aflage networks. Not every falaj is a qanat in the narrow technical sense, because water sources and construction forms differ. But many share the broader logic of gravity-fed distribution and communal management. Again, engineering produces social organization. Water shares are divided. Maintenance becomes collective. Settlement patterns follow the flow. Farther east, Qanat-related technology crosses into Afghanistan and Central Asia, where Kharez systems become vital in dry landscapes. In parts of what is now Western China, underground channels are famously associated with the Turpan Basin, one of the most extreme environments along the routes later grouped under the name Silk Road. Turpan is a place where summer heat can be severe, and the basin lies below sea level in parts. Mountains rise in the distance, gathering snow. Water from those uplands moves toward the basin. Kharez systems capture and guide it underground. The landscape repeats the ancient equation: high water, low settlement, gravity between them. The systems of Turpan are often described as part of a vast human response to aridity. Their exact historical development remains debated, including questions about outside influence and local adaptation. Popular accounts sometimes present a simple story of technology arriving intact from Persia. Archaeological reality is usually less tidy. Knowledge can spread gradually, combine with local practices, and be reinvented in response to similar conditions. No single explanation fully accounts for every underground gallery across Eurasia. What matters is that by the medieval period, related systems exist across an extraordinary geographical range. They help sustain communities along trade routes where water determines the distance between viable stopping points. A caravan can cross a barren stretch only if humans and animals find water at intervals. Towns supported by underground channels become nodes of commerce. Goods pass through. Languages mix. Religious traditions spread. The Qanat rarely receives credit for these movements. Histories of the long-distance trade celebrate silk, spices, metals, horses, and ideas, but trade routes are also routes between water sources. A merchant may care deeply about profit, but his camel remains stubbornly biological. Underground water can therefore support connections between civilizations without ever appearing in the list of traded commodities. The same applies to conquest. When a new army occupies a dry region, it inherits the local water problem immediately. Soldiers require drinking water. Horses consume large quantities. Garrisons must be supplied. Agricultural land must continue producing if the conquerors hope to collect revenue. Destroy every water system, and victory becomes expensive. Preserve or repair them, and the conquered landscape can continue feeding its new rulers. This practical reality encourages technological continuity across political collapse. Dynasties change above ground while the tunnel remains. A qanat built under one authority may be maintained under another whose language, religion, and administrative system are entirely different. The workers descending through the shaft still confront the same gradient. Gravity does not recognize regime change. Later, as Islamic states expand across much of the territory where qanat traditions already exist, underground water technology enters new political and cultural networks. Agricultural knowledge circulates widely. Engineers, farmers, legal scholars, and administrators confront questions of irrigation, ownership, and public benefit. Qanats are repaired and constructed across regions linked by trade and imperial rule. Their spread is not simply a story of Persian influence moving outward in one clean wave. It is a story of repeated transmission. A builder learns from another builder. A community adapts an older tunnel. A ruler resettles skilled workers. A merchant finances irrigation on newly acquired land. A conquered town preserves its water specialists because nobody else understands the underground system. A neighbouring settlement copies what succeeds. Technology moves through human need. Far to the west, underground water galleries eventually appear in parts of the Mediterranean world and Iberia. In Spain, systems associated with Islamic period water management reflect the broader transfer of hydraulic knowledge across North Africa and Al-Andalus. Their relationships to older regional practices can be complex, but the principle of subterranean water capture becomes part of a wider engineering heritage. Centuries later, related techniques cross the Atlantic through colonial expansion. By then, the underground river has travelled so far from its probable early centres that its history becomes difficult to recognise as one story. A shaft in Iran, a Fagara in Algeria, a Kharez in Afghanistan, and an underground gallery elsewhere may belong to distinct local traditions. Their builders do not necessarily see themselves as participants in one ancient technological family, yet viewed across deep time, they reveal the movement of an idea especially suited to difficult landscapes. Do not carry the water under the sun if the earth can protect it. Do not lift water endlessly if gravity can move it. Do not search only for rivers that can be seen. The idea survives because the problem survives. Everywhere the technology travels, however, it inherits a dangerous weakness from its earliest form. The tunnel may cross kingdoms and centuries, but it cannot maintain itself. The more a society depends on underground water, the more devastating neglect becomes, and history is rarely gentle with systems that require constant care. The first sign of failure is often not dramatic. No city wakes to find every channel empty at once. There is no single moment when the underground empire collapses with the clarity of a falling wall. Instead, the water weakens. A farmer notices that his turn reaches the far end of the field more slowly. Sediment gathers where the current once moved cleanly. A shallow branch stops flowing. A tree planted years earlier begins to show stress. At the Qanat outlet, the stream appears smaller than older people remember. Then someone must decide whether the problem is temporary. Perhaps the winter snow was poor. Perhaps the aquifer has not recharged. Perhaps debris has blocked a section upstream. Perhaps a tunnel wall has collapsed. The evidence remains incomplete until workers enter the system, and entering the system costs time, skill, and money. A community already struggling with failed crops may be asked to invest in a repair whose scale remains unknown. This is how vulnerability enters the green landscape. Every qanat depends on continuity. The tunnel must remain open from its source to its outlet. Water does not need the entire structure to fail. A single major collapse in the wrong place can interrupt or severely reduce the flow below it. Loose earth drops from the roof. Gravel enters the channel. Water backs up behind the obstruction or finds a new path through surrounding sediment. Above ground, the fields simply become dry. Repair crews descend through the nearest shafts and move toward the damaged section. If the collapse is small, debris can be cleared. If the tunnel walls remain unstable, the passage may need reinforcement. A major failure can require cutting a new route around the destroyed section. Deep tunnels make every task harder because workers and excavated material must travel farther vertically. The qanat's great advantage becomes part of its weakness. It is hidden. A damaged surface canal can often be inspected by walking beside it. A qanat may require workers to explore darkness to locate the problem. The line of shafts provides access, but the exact condition of the tunnel between them remains invisible from above. A community can know its water is failing without immediately knowing why. Earthquakes can make this uncertainty terrifying. Iran and several other regions where qanats are common lie in tectonically active zones. Ground movement can crack channels, collapse shafts, and alter underground flow paths. Not every earthquake destroys qanats, and local geology strongly influences damage, but a severe event can strike the infrastructure that settlements depend upon. Houses may be rebuilt above ground while water remains trapped behind collapsed earth below. Floods present an opposite danger. It seems strange that a desert water system should fear too much water, but intense rainfall can produce sudden torrents across dry terrain. Open shafts may collect runoff. Floodwater carries mud and debris into the underground network. Surface erosion can damage shaft mouths. In channels near seasonal stream beds, violent flow may reshape the land. The same landscape can suffer drought and flood within the memory of one generation. Climate operates more slowly but can be equally destructive. A qanat ultimately depends on recharge. Snow and rain entering upland aquifers sustain the underground supply. Several dry years may reduce flow gradually. Longer climatic shifts can change the balance more deeply. Springs weaken, wells deepen. The water table falls. A tunnel positioned to intercept groundwater at one elevation may eventually sit above it. Then the qanat becomes a dry passage. Builders can sometimes respond by extending or deepening the source section. A mother well may be pushed farther down. New branches may search for water, but the qanat is constrained by its geometry. If the source is lowered too far, the original tunnel no longer intersects it naturally. A deeper channel may require an entirely new gradient and greater excavation. There is a point at which repair becomes reconstruction. Natural pressures, however, account for only part of the story. Some of the most serious qanat failures begin with human disruption. War removes labour from the countryside. Men who normally clean tunnels become soldiers, refugees, or casualties. Fields are abandoned. Water managers disappear. Specialist families move elsewhere. A conquering army may damage irrigation deliberately, but simple neglect can be just as effective. A qanat does not care whether maintenance stopped because of invasion or taxation. Sediment continues to gather. This is one reason political collapse can transform landscapes long after battles end. Historical narratives often describe a city captured, a dynasty defeated, or a ruler killed. The event receives a date. Water infrastructure declines on a different calendar. The first year of neglect may produce only minor problems. The second may bring reduced flow. A small collapse remains unrepaired. Another section fills with sediment. Farmers downstream receive less water and abandon marginal fields. With fewer productive fields, the community has less wealth to finance maintenance. More people leave. The labour pool shrinks. The system enters a cycle of decline. No single explanation fully accounts for every abandoned Qanat settlement, and historians must be cautious when connecting political events directly to hydraulic failure. Archaeological evidence may show declining occupation, but not the exact sequence of causes. Drought, war, disease, economic change, and shifting trade routes can overlap. Yet the feedback between population and maintenance is clear. Qanats require communities capable of caring for them. When communities weaken, the tunnels weaken. The reverse is equally true. When tunnels weaken, communities may become impossible to sustain. This mutual dependence turns water infrastructure into a kind of social heartbeat. As long as skilled workers descend, channels are cleared, and water shares remain meaningful, the settlement has a future. When maintenance stops, the visible world above slowly loses its foundation. Orchards reveal the change first in a particularly painful way. A grain field can be left unplanted. Trees remain. Their roots search for moisture that no longer arrives. Leaves thin. Branches die. An orchard planted by grandparents can disappear within the lifetime of grandchildren. The wall still stands. Irrigation channels still cross the garden. The geometry of abundance remains, but the water is gone. Desert moves back quickly once human support weakens. Wind carries dust into abandoned canals. Roofs collapse. Fields lose their boundaries. Salt may gather on neglected soils. The difference between settlement and desert, once maintained with precision, begins to blur. From a distance, a dying oasis may still look green for years, then the trees vanish. The fate of Qanats during periods of warfare also exposes a difficult strategic truth. An army occupying a region can seize cities, but maintaining the landscape requires knowledge. If local specialists are killed, displaced, or unwilling to cooperate, conquerors may inherit infrastructure they do not fully understand. The shafts remain visible, the tunnel route can be followed, but knowing where a Qanat runs is not the same as knowing how to repair it. An experienced worker may remember that a particular section collapses after heavy rain. He may know which shaft is too unstable to enter. He may recognize that a reduction in flow usually begins near a specific bend. Such information can exist entirely in living memory. When that memory is broken, the engineering becomes more fragile. This loss is almost impossible to see archaeologically. A tunnel does not preserve the absence of a skilled worker. Yet knowledge can disappear before stone and earth do. There are also cases where changing economic conditions make Qanat maintenance unattractive. A settlement may gain access to another source of water. Trade routes may shift, reducing the value of agricultural production in a remote area. Landowners may invest elsewhere. A costly repair is postponed because the expected return is too low. The Qanat is ancient engineering, but it is still subject to economics. People preserve infrastructure they believe they need. Once that belief changes, even a system inherited across centuries can be abandoned surprisingly quickly. Dry qanats remain scattered across many landscapes, some associated with vanished fields and reduced settlements. Their exact stories differ. One may have failed because groundwater declined. Another may have been damaged by an earthquake. Another fell into neglect during political disorder. Another was replaced by modern pumping. The empty tunnel rarely explains itself. It simply remains beneath the ground. A narrow passage once filled with moving water becomes a cavity of dust. Shafts collapse inward. The spoil mounds soften beneath wind. Above, a road or modern building may cross the route without anyone noticing. Yet the consequences of failure can survive in settlement patterns for centuries. A village moves closer to another water source. Fields return to desert. Population concentrates elsewhere. The green interruption disappears from the plain. The empire beneath the empire does not fall with armies marching through its tunnels. It dies when the water stops reaching daylight. And for archaeologists trying to understand these vanished systems, every dry channel leaves the same difficult problem. The engineering is visible, but the reason for its silence is often hidden. A dry qanat is an archaeological puzzle built from absence. The tunnel survives, but the water is gone. Shafts still cross the plain, but no record explains who first marked their line. A settlement may stand beside the outlet in ruins, its walls eroded and fields erased, while the underground passage continues for kilometers toward a mountain slope. The obvious questions arrive immediately. Who built it? When was it one project or the result of centuries of extension? Did the system fail suddenly, or did its flow decline over generations? The Qanat rarely answers directly. Unlike tombs, underground water channels are not designed to preserve objects. Workers repeatedly enter them to remove debris. Repairs disturb earlier surfaces. Collapsed sections are reopened. New tunnels bypass unstable areas. Shaft mouths are rebuilt. Sediment carried by water passes through. A channel used for 2,000 years can have its earliest archaeological traces cleaned away by the same maintenance that preserves the structure. This makes dating exceptionally difficult. An archaeologist may discover pottery near a shaft, but the pottery could belong to workers who repaired the Qanat centuries after its construction. A piece of wood found in a reinforced section may date the repair rather than the original tunnel. A nearby settlement provides clues, but the settlement itself may have been established after the water system or may have reused an older channel. The evidence remains incomplete. For this reason, the history of Qanat origins is filled with careful language. Researchers identify likely early examples. They compare landscapes, texts, engineering traditions, and patterns of imperial expansion. Ancient Iran remains central to the discussion, particularly during the first millennium BCE. Yet scholars still debate how early mature Qanat technology emerged and whether related underground galleries developed independently in other regions. The mystery becomes more complicated because similar environmental problems can inspire similar solutions. Imagine two communities separated by enormous distance. Both live below dry mountains. Both dig wells and understand that groundwater exists beneath sloping plains. Both have experience cutting tunnels, perhaps for mining or drainage. It is not impossible that each could discover some form of underground gallery without direct contact. At the same time, people and ideas clearly travel. Empires connect regions, merchants cross deserts, specialists migrate, captives are resettled. The spread of closely related technologies across vast distances suggests transmission played a major role in many areas. Separating invention from borrowing is rarely simple. Popular accounts sometimes prefer a clean story. One civilization invents the Qanat, one empire carries it outward. Every similar system becomes a branch of the same original idea. The story is elegant, but archaeology is less obedient. Regional differences matter. Some underground channels tap springs. Others intercept aquifers. Some rely heavily on vertical shafts. Others use natural galleries or modified forms. Construction dates may be uncertain by centuries. No single explanation fully accounts for every system. Even within Iran, the oldest surviving qanats are difficult to treat as untouched relics. A functioning water channel invites repair. If a tunnel collapses after 500 years and workers reopen it, is the system still the original Qanat? If the mother well is deepened, the route extended, and the outlet modified, how should its age be defined? The question resembles an ancient ship whose planks are replaced one by one. The name remains, the route remains, the purpose remains, the material changes. This is one reason oral traditions surrounding qanats can become powerful. Communities sometimes preserve stories of rulers, saints, conquerors, or legendary builders associated with particular channels. Such traditions can contain fragments of memory, but they cannot always be accepted as literal construction records. A qanat attributed to a famous ancient king may have been repaired during his reign, founded much later, or simply attached to a prestigious name. Water attracts stories because water creates settlement. People naturally explain the source of their survival. Some qanats become so old that their construction seems almost impossible to later inhabitants. Deep mother wells and long tunnels inspire admiration. The absence of obvious machinery can encourage exaggerated tales about supernatural builders or forgotten races. These ideas belong to folklore rather than mainstream archaeology, and there is no need to invoke lost advanced civilizations to explain the systems. The tools and methods of skilled human workers are sufficient. What remains extraordinary is not unexplained technology, it is organized persistence. Thousands of workers across generations can achieve results that appear impossible when imagined as one person's task. The mystery lies less in whether ancient people were capable and more in reconstructing how their knowledge was organized. Who selected the route? Who financed the excavation? How many workers participated? Were they free specialists, dependent laborers, state crews, or some combination? How long did major projects take? Ancient written evidence rarely provides complete answers. A royal administration may record land, taxes, or water privileges without naming the workers underground. Later, legal text can describe ownership while saying little about earlier construction. The people whose practical knowledge made the system possible often remain historically anonymous. The tunnels preserve their decisions instead. A slight change in shaft spacing may reveal difficult ground. A reinforced section suggests instability. A bend in the route may indicate an obstacle or an attempt to intercept better water. Multiple channels near one another can show repeated efforts to reach the same aquifer. The Qanat becomes a document written in excavation. Reading that document requires patience. Archaeologists walk the surface line of shafts. They map elevations. They compare outlets with old agricultural zones. Where safe and permitted, specialists inspect accessible tunnels. Remote sensing helps identify patterns invisible from ground level. Historical maps and aerial photographs reveal qanats later damaged by urban growth. Yet even good mapping cannot always provide a date. The underground route may be physically clear and historically silent. This problem appears especially strongly where settlements have vanished. A qanat may cross a plain toward nothing more than scattered pottery and low mounds. The water system implies organized labor and intended cultivation, but the visible town is gone. The tunnel becomes evidence for a community largely erased from the surface. In some cases, abandoned canals below the outlet indicate the extent of former fields. Soil studies may reveal past irrigation. plant remains and pollen can suggest what people cultivated. Together, these clues allow researchers to rebuild a lost landscape. A dry plain becomes an orchard in reconstruction. A low ruin becomes a village. A line of shafts becomes the main artery of a community. The surprising contradiction is that qanats can reveal both human success and environmental uncertainty. A long tunnel shows extraordinary investment, but investment does not guarantee survival. Some systems were abandoned despite generations of labour. The reason may remain unknown. Perhaps groundwater fell. Perhaps war disrupted maintenance. Perhaps a new political centre drew population away. Perhaps several pressures combined. Scholars still debate many individual cases because human history rarely produces one clean cause. The oldest tunnels also raise questions about technological transmission that reach far beyond water. If builders moved between regions, what other knowledge travelled with them? Surveying methods, mining techniques, legal systems of water division, agricultural practices. A qanat is not merely a tunnel. It carries a package of expertise. The moment a new community decides to build one, it needs people capable of understanding groundwater, gradient, excavation, and maintenance. Knowledge may be taught locally over time, but the first successful projects in a new region could depend heavily on specialists. Those specialists almost never leave biographies. Their monuments are lines of holes in the desert. Modern archaeology continues trying to give these anonymous builders a historical place. Better dating methods, landscape surveys, and regional comparisons refine the picture, but uncertainty remains an essential part of the story. The underground empire has no single founding inscription. Its beginnings blur across geology and human memory. And perhaps that is why qanats remain so compelling. They are visible enough to prove an enormous achievement occurred, yet silent enough to preserve questions about the people who first understood how to turn hidden groundwater into rivers beneath the desert. The ancient builders leave no complete blueprint, but the modern landscape is beginning to reveal one. From orbit, lines once visible only to farmers and tunnel workers can now be traced across entire deserts. Satellite images show strings of shafts running from mountain fronts toward abandoned fields. Aerial photographs preserve routes that modern roads and expanding cities have partly destroyed. Digital elevation models reveal the gentle slopes that ancient surveyors had to judge by eye. Hydrologists compare surviving qanats with groundwater levels, while archaeologists map settlements that appear to exist because an underground channel once reached them. For the first time, the hidden empire can be studied at a scale its builders never saw. The view from above is especially powerful because qanats are linear structures. Their shafts often form unmistakable chains across otherwise open terrain. A single hole means little. 100 holes arranged at regular intervals and descending across a plain tell a different story. Even when the tunnel itself cannot be entered, its route can be reconstructed from the surface. Remote sensing does not solve every mystery. Modern development can erase shaft lines. Wind and erosion soften ancient spoil mounds. Agricultural machinery flattens them. Some pits that appear to belong to qanats may have other origins. Researchers must still verify patterns on the ground. The evidence remains incomplete in many regions, especially where political instability, difficult access, or rapid urban expansion limits fieldwork. Yet the growing combination of satellite imagery and archaeology is changing the scale of investigation. A researcher can identify a probable qanat line, trace it toward upland sediments, examine its relationship with ruined settlements, and compare it with old field boundaries. Water engineering becomes part of landscape history rather than an isolated technical curiosity. The desert begins to reveal systems. One abandoned village may connect to several qanats of different lengths. The shortest could belong to an earlier phase when groundwater was higher. A longer line might represent later efforts to reach a more distant source. Additional shafts may suggest repairs or extensions. When these patterns are compared with settlement growth, archaeologists can begin asking whether population expansion drove new water construction or whether new water allowed population growth. The answer is not always obvious. Infrastructure and society feed one another. A successful qanat can create new farmland. New farmland supports more people. More people require more water. Additional qanats are built. Eventually, the system may approach environmental limits. Modern hydrology helps investigate those limits. Scientists study how groundwater moves through alluvial deposits and fractured rock. They measure recharge from mountain snow and rain. They examine changes in the water table. In regions where traditional qanats still flow, discharge can be monitored through seasons and drought cycles. These measurements provide insight into what ancient communities experienced without numerical instruments. A declining flow at the outlet reflects changes occurring far upstream and underground. The Qanat acts almost like a long-term sensor embedded in the aquifer. If water levels fall below the source gallery, discharge weakens. If recharge improves, flow may recover. Surviving systems therefore provide living laboratories. They show how gravity-fed groundwater extraction behaves over decades and, in some cases, across much longer historical periods. One surprising finding is how carefully many qanats match local geology. Builders often position mother wells and upper galleries where water-bearing sediments are most favourable. Tunnel routes avoid some difficult formations while exploiting natural slopes. This does not mean every qanat represents perfect geological understanding. Failures existed and have largely disappeared from memory because unsuccessful systems are less likely to survive. That creates a kind of archaeological bias. The most impressive qanats are often the successful ones. A beautifully functioning ancient channel may tempt observers to imagine that every builder possessed extraordinary accuracy. In reality, generations probably learned through mistakes. Failed shafts, dry tunnels, and abandoned experiments may lie unnoticed beneath the desert. What survives in the record suggests a technology refined by selection. The successful designs continue carrying water. The unsuccessful ones become holes in the ground. Modern mapping also reveals how dense qanat construction can become near-productive aquifers. Several systems may run roughly parallel toward different settlements or estates. This raises an important hydrological question. How did neighbouring qanats affect one another? If two channels tap the same groundwater body, increased extraction may reduce the supply available to each. Ancient builders may have understood this problem practically, even if they lacked modern groundwater models. Legal traditions in some regions regulate the distance between waterworks, reflecting awareness that one person's new excavation can damage another person's supply. The underground world is connected. A tunnel may belong to one village, but the aquifer does not respect property boundaries. Modern science makes this connection visible through groundwater modelling. Researchers can estimate flow directions, recharge zones, and the effect of different extraction methods. The results help explain why qanats often developed within local environmental constraints. The tunnel can only drain water that reaches its level. As the water table falls, the qanat weakens naturally. This is very different from deep pumping. A powerful pump can continue extracting after shallow groundwater declines. Wells can be drilled deeper, larger pumps can be installed. Water can be pulled upward from reserves far below the reach of a traditional qanat. For a time, the landscape may become greener than ever. Modern agriculture can expand across areas ancient communities could never irrigate. Cities grow. Industry consumes water at scales difficult to imagine in earlier centuries. But groundwater records tell another story. In many arid regions, aquifers are declining under intense pumping. This is a broad global problem, not one confined to former Qanat landscapes. Satellite gravity measurements, well data, and regional studies have shown severe groundwater depletion in several major dry zones. Where modern wells operate near traditional qanats, the consequences can be immediate. The water table drops. The qanat source is left above the saturated layer. A tunnel that carried water for centuries becomes dry within a generation. The old system has not failed because its engineering deteriorated. The water has moved beyond its reach. This creates an unusual collision between ancient infrastructure and modern technology. The pump appears superior because it can reach deeper water. It provides greater quantities quickly. A farmer with a mechanical well can irrigate more land than a small qanat share might allow. The qanat seems slow. The pump seems powerful. Yet hydrologists ask a longer question. How quickly is the underground reserve being replaced? A qanat's natural limitations often restrict extraction. A pump can exceed them. This does not make qanats environmentally perfect. Dense qanat networks can affect groundwater. Poorly managed irrigation can still damage soils. Climate change and long droughts can overwhelm traditional systems. Scholars still debate how sustainable specific historical qanat regions were over different periods. But the contrast in extraction speed is difficult to ignore. Ancient builders work with the hydraulic slope. Modern machines can temporarily overpower it. Science is also helping preserve surviving qanats. Laser scanning and detailed surveying can document tunnel geometry. Geographic information systems record shaft locations and water routes. Engineers examine damaged sections. Archaeologists work with local communities whose knowledge remains essential. Technology can map the tunnel. It cannot replace the people who understand its habits. A satellite sees the shaft line, but an experienced qanat worker may know which section becomes unstable after rain. A digital model estimates groundwater flow, but a farmer remembers how the discharge changed across decades. The most useful research often combines modern measurements with local memory. The ancient and modern forms of observation begin to overlap. One works through instruments, the other works through generations. Together they reveal that the qanat is not simply a relic of primitive water engineering. It is a record of humans adapting infrastructure to geological limits. And as the modern world pushes beyond those limits with pumps, deep wells, and accelerating demand, the silent tunnels beneath the desert are becoming part of a much larger question. Not how ancient people found water, but how long any civilization can keep taking it faster than the earth can replace it. The modern well arrives with a promise ancient qanat builders could hardly have imagined. Water no longer has to begin at a higher elevation. It no longer has to follow the shape of the land. A powerful pump can pull groundwater upward from depths unreachable to a gravity-fed tunnel and send it through pipes toward fields, reservoirs, towns, and factories. The old rules seem to disappear. Slope becomes optional. Distance matters less. A farmer can drill where the soil looks productive and, if water lies below, bring it to the surface with an engine. For communities long constrained by narrow water shares, this power is transformative. Fields expand beyond the reach of old canals. New crops are planted. Agricultural production increases. Towns grow into cities. water can be delivered to neighborhoods built above traditional Qanat outlets. In a few years, pumped groundwater can support development that would have required generations of underground excavation. The Qanat begins to look obsolete. Its flow is limited, its maintenance is dangerous. A collapsed tunnel requires skilled workers to descend through narrow shafts. A mechanical well appears simpler. Drill downward, install a pump, connect power. Water rises. The comparison seems unfair. Yet beneath the ground, the aquifer experiences both systems very differently. A Qanat is bound to a particular elevation. Its source gallery intersects groundwater where saturated sediments meet the tunnel. Water flows naturally into the channel and descends toward the outlet. If the water table drops below that gallery, the Qanat weakens. It cannot chase the water downward without major reconstruction. The system is therefore forced to respond to decline. A pump is not. When the groundwater level falls, the well can sometimes be deepened. A stronger pump may be installed. Extraction continues from lower levels. One dry year becomes a reason to pump more. Expanding agriculture becomes a reason to drill additional wells. Growing cities demand larger supplies. The ancient limit is treated as a technical problem. Modern engineering solves it, then solves it again, and again, until the problem changes. Groundwater is often imagined as an underground lake waiting beneath the desert, but many aquifers are more complicated. Water occupies pores and fractures within sediments and rock. Recharge can be slow. In some arid regions, part of the water being pumped today entered the ground under climatic conditions very different from the present. A well can therefore draw from reserves accumulated over long periods. The pump delivers water immediately. The mountain replaces it slowly. This difference in speed is the center of the modern crisis. No single explanation fully accounts for groundwater decline across every dry region. Climate change alters precipitation and snowpack. Population growth increases demand. Agricultural policy can encourage water-intensive crops. Urban expansion competes with farming. Poor regulation allows excessive drilling. Leaking infrastructure wastes supply. Yet intensive pumping is one of the clearest ways humans can lower groundwater faster than natural recharge restores it. The Qanat becomes an accidental witness. For centuries, water may emerge from an old tunnel at a relatively steady seasonal rhythm. Deep wells are drilled nearby. Pumps begin extracting from the same groundwater system. The water table falls. The Qanat flow weakens. Farmers who still depend on it may clean the tunnel, assuming sediment has blocked the channel. Workers inspect the source. The passage remains open. There is simply less water at its level. Eventually, the tunnel becomes dry. Nothing has collapsed. The gradient remains precise. The shafts still follow their ancient line. The engineering works exactly as intended. The aquifer has moved away from it. This is one of the strangest forms of technological defeat. The Qanat is not replaced because a newer system performs the same task more efficiently within the same limits. It is often replaced by a technology capable of exceeding those limits. For a time, this looks like progress, and in important ways, it is. Modern pumps have supplied drinking water, supported food production, and allowed communities to survive droughts. Romanticizing ancient hardship would be a mistake. Qanat societies face scarcity, inequality, crop failure, and constant maintenance dangers. Traditional water systems did not create environmental paradise. The evidence remains incomplete for many historical aquifers, and scholars still debate exactly how sustainable particular Qanat networks were across long periods. But the old tunnels contain a principle modern societies sometimes prefer to ignore. Physical limits do not disappear when technology overcomes them temporarily. They move. The Qanat accepts the height of the water table as a boundary. The pump lowers the boundary. When groundwater is removed from sediments faster than it is replaced, the consequences can extend beyond dry wells. In some regions, land subsidence becomes a serious problem. As water pressure declines, underground layers compact, the ground surface sinks, the desert itself changes elevation, buildings crack, roads deform, canals lose carefully designed gradients. Damage may be permanent because compacted sediments do not always recover, even if groundwater later returns. An ancient Qanat requires a precise slope. Subsidence can destroy that precision. A modern water crisis can therefore damage the older infrastructure beneath it in more than one way. Falling groundwater dries the source. Sinking land distorts the route. Urban development fills shafts, cuts tunnels, and builds over access points. The underground empire is squeezed from below and above. Near expanding cities, Qanat routes that survive centuries can disappear beneath roads and foundations. Open shafts become hazards in urban landscapes and may be sealed without full documentation. Wastewater can contaminate channels. Industrial activity changes the quality of groundwater. A system designed for a smaller agricultural society enters a world it was never built to serve. The temptation is to describe this as a simple contest between ancient wisdom and modern arrogance. Reality is less comfortable. Cities with millions of people cannot always depend on qanats built for villages. Modern agriculture feeds populations far larger than many ancient societies. Hospitals, industries, sanitation systems, and urban households require dependable supply at scales gravity-fed channels may never provide. Returning entirely to traditional infrastructure is not a realistic answer in most places. The deeper question is whether modern water systems can recover the respect for limits that qanats were forced to obey. Some communities continue maintaining underground channels because their flows remain valuable. In certain regions, qanats still provide water without fuel cost for pumping. They can protect water from intense evaporation along much of the route. Their cultural and historical importance has encouraged preservation efforts. But preservation alone cannot save a qanat if surrounding groundwater is aggressively depleted. A beautifully restored tunnel can still run dry. This is why modern hydrology increasingly treats aquifers as shared systems rather than private reservoirs beneath individual properties. One well can affect another. Hundreds of wells can alter a region. Pumping near mountain recharge zones can influence water availability downstream. The ancient water dispute has returned at a larger scale. Who owns moving groundwater? Who has the right to extract it? How much can be taken before neighbouring users suffer? The Qanat community once divided a visible flow by hours. Modern societies must divide an invisible aquifer by law, policy, measurement, and prediction. The problem is harder because the consequences are delayed. A farmer sees water rise from his well today. The crop grows. The investment succeeds. The falling water table may become obvious years later. Short-term success hides long-term decline. Ancient qanats also experienced delay, but their physical limitations made overreach more visible. Weakening flow arrived at the outlet. Expansion stopped when the channel could not supply another field. Mechanical extraction separates demand from immediate natural flow. The aquifer can be spent like savings. For a while, everyone appears wealthier. Then the balance is checked. Across former qanat landscapes, dry shaft lines now run beside modern irrigated fields. the contrast is almost too perfect. On one side lies an ancient tunnel that stopped flowing because groundwater fell. Nearby, electric or diesel pumps continue lifting water from deeper below. The old system appears dead. The modern field appears green, but the colours tell only the present. Beneath both lies the same finite geological structure. And for the first time since humans learned to guide water through tunnels beneath the desert, the greatest engineering challenge is no longer how to reach the hidden river. It is how to stop draining it beyond recovery. In a few places, the underground rivers are still moving. A shaft opens in the desert, its rim softened by wind and years of repair. Far below, water passes through darkness along a tunnel whose original builders may have lived under a government that no longer exists. Their language may have changed. Their town may have expanded, contracted, or shifted across the plain. Roads, power lines, and concrete buildings now cross the landscape above. Yet the channel continues to obey the same gradient. Mountain water enters the earth. Gravity carries it down. People wait at the other end. Surviving qanats are often described as ancient monuments, and many certainly deserve protection as historical structures. But the word monument can be misleading. A monument is expected to stand still. A qanat survives through movement. Water must flow. Workers must descend. Debris must be cleared. Ownership and maintenance must remain meaningful. The system stays alive only while a community continues participating in it. This makes a functioning qanat something stranger than a ruin. It is old infrastructure still performing its original purpose. A stone temple may survive while its rituals vanish. A fortress may remain long after its army disappears. A qanat carrying water today is doing almost exactly what it was built to do. The builders would recognize the result. They might not recognize the city around it. In parts of Iran, Oman, North Africa, Afghanistan, Central Asia, and other regions with related traditions, surviving underground channels remain part of local water systems. Their exact condition varies widely. Some continue supplying agriculture. Others provide smaller flows than in earlier generations. Some are maintained mainly because of cultural importance. Many have already fallen dry. The global picture is uneven, and the evidence remains incomplete. There is no single story of qanat survival. One community may preserve its channel because pumping costs are high, and gravity-fed water remains economically valuable. Another abandons a similar system because younger workers are unwilling to enter dangerous tunnels. A city may protect an ancient route while urban construction destroys another nearby. Survival depends on geology, economics, law, and memory. Most of all, it depends on people still believing the water system has a future. This belief is becoming harder to sustain in some places. Traditional qanat specialists often possess skills developed through years of practical work. They understand shaft safety, tunnel geometry, and the behavior of different ground materials. Their expertise may pass through families or apprenticeships. But qanat digging is dangerous. It is physically demanding. Modern employment offers alternatives. A young person may reasonably choose a job that does not involve being lowered into a narrow shaft above a tunnel that could collapse. As older specialists retire or die, knowledge can disappear. The physical tunnel may remain. The human system weakens. Preservation projects sometimes respond by documenting techniques, mapping routes, and training new workers. International recognition has also brought attention to historic qanat landscapes. UNESCO has inscribed groups of Persian qanats and other traditional water management systems as World Heritage properties. acknowledging not merely individual tunnels but the cultural landscapes shaped around water. Recognition matters, but a plaque cannot repair a collapsed gallery. The challenge is keeping living infrastructure alive without turning it into a museum object. Tourism can help finance protection in certain places, yet tourists usually encounter the safest and most accessible parts of underground water heritage. The working reality is less comfortable. Maintenance involves mud, darkness, unstable ground, and expensive labour. The Qanat has always required commitment. Modern societies must decide whether that commitment remains worthwhile. There are strong practical arguments for preserving functioning systems where local conditions support them. Qanats use gravity instead of fuel-powered lifting. Much of the water travels underground, limiting exposure to intense surface evaporation. Their flows may encourage agriculture adapted to a known supply rather than unlimited expansion based on aggressive pumping. Yet qanats are not universal solutions. They cannot provide water where suitable geology is absent. They may not meet the demands of large modern populations. Climate change can alter recharge. Long droughts can reduce flow. Contamination can make water unsafe. A damaged long tunnel may cost more to repair than communities can afford. Romantic claims that ancient engineering can simply replace modern water systems underestimate today's scale of demand. The lesson of the Qanat is more subtle. It is not that people should abandon pumps and return to tunnels. It is that infrastructure should understand the environment it depends on. The ancient builder begins with landscape. He looks toward the mountain. He studies the slope. He searches for signs of groundwater. He accepts that water must begin above its destination. The entire design is shaped around a physical limit that cannot be negotiated away. Modern engineering often begins with demand. A city needs more water. A field requires irrigation. A factory expands. The question becomes how to supply the requirement. Technology provides impressive answers: dams, deep wells, pipelines, desalination plants, recycling systems, long-distance water transfers. These systems have supported billions of people and created forms of prosperity impossible in earlier eras, but demand can grow faster than supply. Then engineering becomes trapped in a race against its own success. More water allows expansion. Expansion creates greater demand. Greater demand requires more infrastructure. The Qanat offers a different rhythm. Its flow is limited and visible. A community knows approximately what arrives. Agriculture develops around the channel. Watershares create constraints. Those constraints can be unfair, especially where powerful owners control the best access. But the physical amount of water remains difficult to ignore. Scarcity is present in daily life. Modern groundwater depletion can hide scarcity underground for decades. The fields remain green while the aquifer falls. This is why old Qanat landscapes have become relevant to scientists and water managers who are not interested in nostalgia. They provide long-term examples of communities organizing around limited flows, not perfect examples, not timeless systems untouched by conflict, but evidence that survival in extreme environments often requires social rules as much as technology. A tunnel alone cannot divide water. People must agree on a schedule. A shaft cannot organize repairs. People must provide labor. The aquifer cannot defend itself from overuse. People must decide when extraction becomes too much. The ancient water empire is therefore not really a story about tunnels. It is a story about relationships. Mountains are connected to plains. Winter snow is connected to summer crops. Workers underground are connected to farmers above. One household's water turn is connected to another household's patience. A settlement's prosperity is connected to geology kilometers away. Modern infrastructure sometimes disguises these relationships. A tap is opened, and water appears. The source remains distant. A pump starts automatically. A reservoir lies beyond the city. The system is so effective that people can forget the landscape supplying it. Qanat communities rarely have that luxury. The line of shafts points visibly toward the source. The outlet reveals the current flow. When water declines, everyone sees the change. Perhaps this is the deepest surviving lesson of the underground empire. Water should never become invisible simply because infrastructure works well. Ancient qanats made the route physically invisible by placing it beneath the desert. Yet socially, water remained central. Rights, schedules, labour, agriculture, and settlement all revolved around its movement. Modern water is often physically visible in pipes, canals, sprinklers, and taps while becoming socially abstract. The supply is assumed until it fails. Across dry regions facing rising temperatures, unstable precipitation, population pressure, and groundwater decline, the future will require technologies far more advanced than qanats, better monitoring, efficient irrigation, groundwater regulation, wastewater reuse, and, in suitable regions, desalination may all play roles. But advanced tools still confront ancient questions. Where does the water come from? How quickly is it replaced? Who controls it? Who loses when the supply declines? And how much growth can a landscape support? The Qanat never solved these questions permanently. Its history contains abandoned villages, dry tunnels, unequal ownership, and systems destroyed by war or neglect. Yet some channels endured. They survived because generations repeatedly accepted responsibility for something they did not individually build and could not privately control in isolation. A worker clears a blockage created before he was born. A farmer respects a water schedule developed by earlier generations. A community repairs a tunnel whose original surveyor has been forgotten for 1,000 years. This is infrastructure operating on a timescale longer than individual memory. Modern societies are capable of enormous projects. The harder challenge may be maintaining them with the same long view. Beneath the desert, the old tunnels remain. Some are silent. Some carry only a thin stream. Others still deliver water into fields and gardens. Their lines of shafts stretch toward mountains that continue collecting winter snow, though changing climate may alter how much and how reliably. The underground empire has lost much of its territory. It will never again dominate water supply across these regions in the way it once did, but it has not completely vanished. Every surviving flow is evidence of a contract between human engineering and landscape. The terms are simple. Take water from where gravity allows, protect the route, maintain the tunnel, share the flow, and remember that the green world above depends on something hidden below. For thousands of years, people have walked across dry plains without seeing the rivers beneath their feet. They have built houses, planted trees, raised families, fought wars, and watched rulers disappear, while water moved quietly through narrow channels in the darkness. It travelled without engines and without ceremony, carrying melted snow and mountain rain toward places where life waited at the edge of possibility. Many of those tunnels are empty now. The fields they once fed have faded into dust. Walls have fallen. Gardens have vanished so completely that only patterns in soil or lines of old shafts suggest they ever existed. Somewhere beneath those abandoned landscapes, a channel may still preserve the exact angle chosen by a surveyor whose name was never written down. He could not know how long his work would last. Perhaps he believed the settlement above would remain forever. Most civilizations do. Yet the Qanat tells a quieter story about permanence. Nothing survives simply because it was built well. The tunnel must be cleared, the water must be divided, knowledge must be passed on. Each generation inherits a system shaped by people it cannot remember and decides, deliberately or through neglect, whether another generation will receive it. The desert is patient with those decisions. A garden can take decades to grow and only a few dry years to weaken. An aquifer can accumulate water across centuries and be drained far more quickly. A green landscape may appear permanent to the person born inside it, even when its survival depends on a narrow stream flowing beneath kilometers of stone. Perhaps that is why the old shaft lines remain so haunting. They point across empty ground like paths. Follow them one way, and they lead toward mountains, snow, and hidden water. Follow them the other, and they lead toward villages, fields, orchards, and all the complicated machinery of human civilization. Between these two worlds lies a dark tunnel, small enough for a worker to crawl through, precise enough to carry a river. For centuries, water passed there while empires rose above it and disappeared, and somewhere, beneath a desert that still looks completely empty, it is passing there now.